Hello and welcome back. Tonight we're going to do something a little different. Get yourself comfortable, grab a blanket if you need one, and settle in, because we're going to spend the next few hours talking about The Simpsons, but not in the way you might expect. We're not going to rank episodes or debate which season was the best. Instead, we're going to talk about the conspiracy theories, the fan theories, the strange, persistent ideas that have surrounded this show for decades. And specifically, we're going to focus on the ones that the show itself has never really bothered to deny. Now, The Simpsons has been on the air since December of 1989. That's over 800 episodes across 37 seasons. It is the longest-running scripted primetime show in American television history, and in that time, the internet has produced an absolutely enormous catalog of fan theories about it. Some of them are silly, some of them are surprisingly well-researched, and some of them the creators and writers have simply never shut down. That's what makes tonight's topic so interesting to me. It's not just the theories themselves, it's the silence around them. Because the writers and producers of The Simpsons have had countless opportunities over the years, in interviews, in DVD commentaries, on Twitter, even inside the show itself, to say, no, that's absolutely not true, stop reading into it. And for some of these theories, they just haven't, or they've given answers so vague and playful that fans walked away from the conversation more convinced than they were before. So tonight, we're going to go through them, one by one. The famous Homer coma theory, the real story behind who shot Mr. Burns, whether Maggie Simpson is secretly something far more intelligent and far more dangerous than anyone in her family realizes, the impossible geography of Springfield, why Homer can somehow afford his lifestyle, and a few more that I think are going to make you look at the show very differently the next time you watch it. If you enjoy this kind of deep dive content and want more cozy, long-form stuff like this, subscribing is the easiest way to support the channel. But absolutely no pressure. Let's just get into it. We're going to start with the big one, the most famous Simpsons conspiracy theory of all time, and honestly, for good reason, because once you hear it laid out properly, it's very hard to unhear it. In October of 1992, Season 4 of The Simpsons aired an episode called Homer the Heretic. It's a classic. Homer decides he doesn't want to go to church anymore, starts his own religion, nearly dies in a house fire because of his negligence, and eventually goes back to church. Standard Homer stuff. But the episode ends with a scene that, at the time, felt like nothing more than a sweet little throwaway gag. Homer falls asleep during the church service and has a dream. In the dream, he meets God, and they have a conversation. Homer asks God what the meaning of life is. God says he can't tell him that. Homer begs. God says, you'll find out when you die. Homer, being Homer, says he can't wait that long, and then God replies with something that nobody thought twice about in 1992, but that fans would obsess over for the next 30 years. God says, you can't wait 6 months? Homer convinces God to tell him the answer anyway, and God begins to speak. But the episode cuts to credits before we hear what God actually says. It's a fun little cliffhanger, a playful ending to a playful episode. And at the time, that's all it was. Just a joke. God telling Homer he's going to die in 6 months, and then the episode ending before the punchline lands. 6 months later, in April of 1993, Season 4 aired another episode. So it's come to this, a Simpsons clip show. In this one, Bart pulls an April Fool's Day prank on Homer. He shakes up a can of beer so violently that when Homer opens it, the explosion sends him to the hospital. While Homer is recovering in the hospital, he gets into an argument with a vending machine. The vending machine falls on him, and Homer slips into a coma. Now, the episode handles this the way The Simpsons handles everything. The family visits him in the hospital. There are some clips from previous episodes as they reminisce. Mr. Burns tries to pull the plug on him, and eventually, at the very end, Homer just wakes up. He starts strangling Bart. Everyone laughs. Life goes back to normal. Credits roll. Next episode, nothing has changed. Classic Simpsons reset button. But here's where it gets interesting. A Reddit user who went by the name Hard Topic a Name put together a theory that would eventually make headlines around the world. The theory is simple, and once you hear it, it sticks with you. What if Homer never actually woke up from that coma? What if everything that has happened on The Simpsons after April of 1993, every single episode from that point forward, is taking place inside Homer's head? I know that sounds like a reach at first, but stay with me on this one because the evidence is more compelling than you'd expect. First, there's the God thing. God told Homer to his face that he was going to die in 6 months. And 6 months later, in real-world air date terms, Homer had a catastrophic accident and fell into a coma. Now, it seems fairly unlikely that God, within the universe of the show, would be wrong about this. And it seems even less likely that God would outright lie. So if God said 6 months and 6 months later something happened that could very plausibly have killed Homer, then maybe God wasn't wrong. Maybe Homer did, in a sense, die that day. Or at least the Homer that existed in the real Springfield died. And what we've been watching ever since is the Homer who exists inside a hospital bed dreaming. Second, and this is the part that really sold a lot of people on the theory, there's a noticeable shift in the show's tone after that coma episode. Before it, the plots were grounded. Realistic, even. Bart cheats on an IQ test. Lisa develops a crush on her substitute teacher. Homer tries to give up drinking. Marge considers having an affair. These are stories about a real family dealing with real problems. Mundane stuff. Relatable stuff. The kind of everyday struggles that made the early seasons feel so authentic. After the coma, though, the show starts getting weird. And it keeps getting weirder. Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Bart discovers a secret underground society of jockeys. Principal Skinner is revealed to be an imposter named Armin Tamzarian, which even the writers admit was a mistake. Homer joins a secret society called the Stonecutters. The show is bombarded with celebrity guest stars. The stories stop being about a family and start being about increasingly absurd adventures. And the coma theory explains this beautifully. If Homer is lying in a hospital bed, unconscious, then his mind is doing what any dreaming mind would do. It's fabricating scenarios based on fragments of what it knows. Homer is a man of simple pleasures and big imagination, so naturally his dream world would be bigger, wilder, more colorful than the mundane reality he came from. And because people in comas can sometimes hear what's happening around them, the theory suggests that Homer's brain is picking up information from the real world. A nurse mentions Lady Gaga, and suddenly Lady Gaga shows up in an episode. Someone mentions a new president, and Homer's dream incorporates it. The world moves on, but Homer stays frozen in 1993, dreaming of his family exactly as they were. Which brings us to the most elegant part of the theory. Nobody ages. Bart is always 10. Lisa is always 8. Maggie is always 1. Homer and Marge never get older. And while the show has always hand-waved this as just being a cartoon, the coma theory provides an actual in-universe explanation. Homer remembers his family from the last time he saw them. In his mind, they will always be exactly the ages they were on the day he went to sleep. He knows somewhere deep down that time is passing. So his mind updates the world around them, incorporating new technology and new cultural references, but it can never update the people, because the people are fixed in his memory. This theory went absolutely viral. It made the front page of Yahoo. It was reported on in Australia, Belgium, all over the world. And it got big enough that TMZ actually tracked down Al Jean, the showrunner of The Simpsons, and asked him about it directly. Now, here's the part that matters for tonight's conversation. Al Jean's response. Because it was not, in any meaningful sense, a denial. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that it would mean that back in 1993, the writers would have had to presume the show was going to continue for years and years more. And that right before they left, they planted this hidden monkey wrench for all their successors to deal with. He said it wasn't true, but the way he said it was interesting. He framed it as logistically unlikely, not as narratively impossible. He didn't say the theory was wrong about the show changing. He didn't say the evidence didn't add up. He just said they didn't plan it. And honestly, that's not really a denial. That's a writer being careful with his words. Because saying, we didn't intend it, is very different from saying it doesn't work. But it gets better, because the show itself eventually addressed the theory. In season 34, episode 3, an episode called Lisa the Boy Scout, the show did something really clever. It's a meta episode, one of those ones where the show gets self-referential and plays with its own format. In this particular episode, there's a segment showcasing deliberately terrible deleted scenes that the writer supposedly cut from various episodes over the years. And one of those deleted scenes features Homer waking up from a decades-long coma and realizing that everything since his accident never really happened. Now think about what the show did there. They acknowledged the theory. They brought it into the show. They animated it, and they framed it as a deliberately terrible idea. They said, in effect, we know about this theory and we think it would make for a disappointing ending. But in doing so, they didn't actually prove it wrong. They just said they wouldn't use it, which, if you think about it, is the most Simpsons response possible. They had their cake and ate it too. They winked at the audience without actually closing the door. I find that fascinating personally, because the coma theory doesn't need to be literally true to be useful. It provides a framework that explains in a strangely satisfying way why the show changed, why it went from grounded family comedy to something much bigger and much stranger. And the fact that the writers keep referencing it, keep acknowledging it, keep playing with it, suggests that they find it as compelling as we do. They could ignore it. They don't. They could shut it down hard. They won't. And that ambiguity is, I think, the whole point. But the coma theory rests on one crucial scene. That conversation with God in Homer the Heretic. The one where God begins to reveal the meaning of life, and the credits roll before we hear it. And it turns out that that conversation has its own conspiracy theory attached to it. One that goes even deeper than the coma. Because the question isn't just whether Homer went into a coma. The question is what God told him in that dream. And one of the most popular theories about that conversation might actually explain something that's bothered fans for decades. So let me set the scene again. It's the final moments of Homer the Heretic. Homer has fallen asleep in church, which is ironic given that the whole episode was about him refusing to go. He dreams of God. They talk. Homer asks the meaning of life. God says he can't tell him, that Homer will find out when he dies. Homer pushes back. God relents and begins to speak. And then the episode ends. Now, the obvious reading is that this is just a joke. The comedy is in the interruption. We never hear the answer because the answer doesn't matter. What matters is the bit, the setup and the lack of a punchline. Classic Simpsons humor. But fans, being fans, couldn't leave it alone. And one particular theory, which has been floating around Reddit and Simpsons forums for years, proposes something genuinely wild. The theory is that God told Homer he's a cartoon character, that nothing around him is real, that there are no lasting consequences for anything he does because he exists in a fictional world created for the entertainment of an audience he will never meet. I know, stay with me, because if you actually sit with this idea for a minute, it starts to explain a lot. Think about the way Homer's personality changes over the course of the series. In the early seasons, Homer is a lovable, flawed, deeply human father. He worries about money. He feels guilty when he lets his family down. He struggles with his weight, his intelligence, his marriage. He's recognizable. He's someone you might actually know. But as the seasons go on, something shifts. Homer becomes less careful, less afraid of consequences. He gets into situations that should absolutely kill him and walks away without a scratch. He does things that would get any real person arrested, fired, divorced, and it all just resets by the next episode. His personality gets louder, more reckless, more extreme. Fans call this Flanderization, named after Ned Flanders, whose character was similarly reduced to a single exaggerated trait over time. But the God theory offers a different explanation. What if Homer's personality didn't degrade? What if Homer learned something? What if, in that dream, God showed Homer the truth, that he is a character in a television show, and that truth changed him? Because if nothing is real, if there are no permanent consequences, if everything resets at the end of every episode, then why would you be careful? Why would you hold back? Why wouldn't you eat whatever you want, say whatever you want, do whatever you want? You're not going to die. You're not going to lose your family. You're not going to face any real punishment. You're a cartoon. And the theory goes further. It doesn't just explain Homer. It explains the Flanderization of the entire cast. Because if the show's universe is, within its own logic, a constructed fictional space, then every character within it is subject to the same forces. They all become simpler over time. They all lose nuance. They all become more like archetypes and less like people. Not because the writers got lazy according to the theory, but because that's what happens to characters in a long-running show. The universe itself is simplifying. The simulation, if you want to call it that, is degrading. Now, here's the important thing for our purposes tonight. No writer or producer has ever been directly asked this specific question and given a definitive answer. The conversation between Homer and God is always treated as a joke, a mystery, a fun little loose end. Whenever interviewers bring up the meaning of life scene, the response is always some version of a smile and a shrug. Never a clear answer. Never, oh, we know exactly what God said and it was this. That silence is interesting, because the writers of The Simpsons are not people who avoid talking about their work. They do commentary tracks. They do interviews. They do podcasts. They are, as a group, some of the most articulate and thoughtful television writers in the history of the medium. If they wanted to pin down what God told Homer, they could. They just don't. And there's an alternative reading of the scene that I think is worth mentioning too. Because maybe the beauty of that moment is that it works precisely because we never hear the answer. The meaning of life in the world of The Simpsons is whatever you project onto that silence. If you think it's something cosmic and profound, it is. If you think it's something absurdly simple, like the meaning of life is donuts, it's that too. The scene becomes a mirror. And maybe the writers understand that giving it a definitive answer would actually make it less meaningful. Sometimes the unanswered question is more interesting than any answer could be. Either way, the fact remains, God spoke to Homer Simpson in a dream. Homer convinced God to reveal the meaning of life. We never heard what was said, and nobody involved with the show has ever told us. They just let the mystery sit there, accumulating theories like dust on a shelf for over 30 years. That silence, that willingness to let fans fill in the blanks without correction is kind of a running theme with The Simpsons when it comes to their biggest mysteries. And nowhere is that more true than with the single biggest whodunit the show ever created. In the spring of 1995, The Simpsons did something that no animated show had ever really attempted before. They created a genuine, full-blown national mystery. A cliffhanger that had the entire country guessing. And they built it around a question so simple that even the marketing campaign could fit it on a bumper sticker. Who shot Mr. Burns? If you weren't around for it, or if you were too young to remember, it's hard to overstate how big this was. This was before social media, before Reddit, before YouTube, and yet the buzz around this two-part episode was everywhere. Fox ran a whole promotional campaign around it. There was a contest. Viewers were invited to guess the shooter, and the winner would be animated onto an actual episode of The Simpsons. It was a cultural event in the way that only 1990s network television could pull off. The setup was Season 6, Episode 25. Mr. Burns, in his most villainous move yet, builds a giant device that literally blocks out the sun over Springfield. The entire town is furious. Virtually every major character has a reason to want Burns dead. Bart is angry because Burns ruined his treehouse. Homer is angry because Burns can never remember his name. Moe lost his bar. Barney lost his drinking hole. Grandpa lost the nursing home's oil. Lisa's music program was cut. Tito Puente, of all people, wanted revenge. Basically, everyone in Springfield had motive, and the writers designed it that way on purpose. After the town meeting where Burns reveals his sun-blocking machine, there's this eerie, quiet scene. Burns walks through the town square, alone, whistling to himself. Everyone has left. The streets are deserted. And then he walks behind a pillar, out of view. We hear him say, "Oh, it's you. What are you so happy about?" He gasps, "I see. I think you better drop it." I said drop it. There's a struggle. And then a gunshot. Burns staggers out from behind the building, clutching his chest. He collapses onto the town sundial. His arms land on what appear to be the letters W and S, or, depending on your perspective, M and S. And that's where the episode ends. Summer cliffhanger. America loses its collective mind. Now, the resolution came in the Season 7 premiere, and the official answer was Maggie Simpson. Here's how it played out, according to the show. After Burns left the town meeting, he walked to the parking lot and found Maggie alone sitting in the Simpson family car. She was holding a lollipop. Burns, being Burns, decided to try and take it from her, literally taking candy from a baby. But because Burns is so physically frail, even a baby proved to be a challenge. They struggled over the lollipop, and during the struggle, Burns' gun slipped from its holster and fell into Maggie's hands. When Burns finally yanked the candy away, the gun went off. The gun and the lollipop both fell under the car seat. Homer later found the gun while searching for an ice cream cone, leaving his fingerprints on it, which is why he became the prime suspect. The lollipop stayed under the seat until a police officer recovered it, and Burns, losing strength, staggered to the sundial and collapsed. As for the arm positioning on the sundial, Lisa figured out that from Burns's perspective, the W and S would actually read as M and S, Maggie Simpson's initials. But Burns himself corrected her. He said he hadn't been trying to point to anything. He'd used his last ounce of strength to suck out his goal fillings and swallow them so the paramedics wouldn't steal them. The arm positioning was pure coincidence. Case closed, right? Well, not exactly, because the show left a few things unresolved. And the biggest one comes in the final seconds of the episode. After the case is wrapped up, after everyone has filed out of the room, Marge insists that the shooting must have been an accident. And we get one final shot of Maggie. She looks around the room. She waits until she's certain nobody is watching. And then, very deliberately, she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics firing a gun. That's how the episode ends, with a baby, alone in a room, pantomiming gunfire. Now, Marge says it was an accident. Chief Wiggum says no jury would convict a baby except maybe Texas. The episode presents the shooting as an unfortunate accident caused by Burns's own greed and frailty. But that final shot of Maggie exists, and it has haunted fans ever since. Because here's the thing, the writers chose to end the episode on that image. That was a deliberate creative decision. They could have ended on Burns in the hospital bed. They could have ended on the family walking out together. They could have ended on Homer strangling Bart, which is how half the episodes in that era ended. Instead, they chose to end on Maggie, alone, performing a calculated action that directly contradicts the "it was an accident" explanation. And they have never fully explained it. There's also the contest to talk about, because that's where things get genuinely bizarre. The contest invited viewers to guess who shot Mr. Burns, and the prize was being animated onto the show. Thousands of people submitted guesses, and according to the DVD commentary for the episodes, nobody in the official random sample of entries got the right answer. The winner was selected from that random sample, didn't have the correct guess, and was paid a cash prize instead of being animated. Nobody was ever animated onto the show. The promise was broken, not out of bad faith, but because the official process didn't produce a correct answer. However, and this is a detail that the writers themselves shared on the commentary, they were aware of one person who posted the correct answer to a Simpsons news group online on the night that Part 1 aired. This person figured it out immediately, but because the contest was ongoing, the writers were forbidden from contacting them. When the contest ended and they tried to track the person down, the answer had been posted from a college internet account. By the time summer was over, the account was no longer active. They couldn't find the person. They issued an open invitation on the DVD release for this mystery solver to come forward. As far as anyone knows, that person never did. So you've got the show's biggest mystery, and the one person who solved it on the first night is themselves a mystery. There's something very Simpsons about that. But the theories didn't stop at Maggie, because a lot of fans have never been fully satisfied with the official answer. And one of the most popular alternative theories puts the gun in Marge's hands. The logic goes like this. Marge is a devoted mother and a passionate member of the Springfield community. Burns destroyed her town. He ruined her family's livelihood. And in a separate episode, Marge gets a job. Burns actually fell in love with Marge, which could explain why he wouldn't identify her as the shooter. If Burns recognized Marge as the person who shot him, he might have had a complicated emotional reason for keeping quiet. And if Maggie's pacifier gunshot at the end of the episode is mimicry rather than memory, then maybe what Maggie is imitating is something she saw her mother do. It's speculative, obviously. And in season 18, Homer himself briefly claims to have been the shooter, though that's played entirely as a joke. But the Marge theory persists because the show has never addressed it directly. The writers seem perfectly happy to let the official answer sit alongside these alternatives without ever firmly stamping out the debate. There were also multiple endings animated to prevent the real answer from being leaked during production. The most complete alternate ending showed Smithers as the shooter. This was eventually aired during The Simpsons' 138th episode Spectacular, which was a meta episode hosted by Troy McClure that looked back at the show's history and showed deleted scenes. When the Smithers ending was shown, Troy McClure himself pointed out the problem with it, saying that for Smithers to be guilty, you'd have to ignore all the DNA evidence, which would be, quote, downright nutty. That was a direct reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, which was dominating the news at the time. And early in the writing process, the writers actually considered making Barney Gumble the shooter. The reasoning was simple. Burns had taken away his bar, and the writers couldn't think of anything else to do with Barney at the time. They even left a subtle clue, or at least an absence of one. Barney is the only suspect who is never questioned by Chief Wiggum during the investigation and never provides an alibi. All of this adds up to a mystery that the show technically solved but never really put to rest. The official answer is Maggie, but the final image undermines the official answer. The contest that was supposed to celebrate the answer produced no correct winner. The alternate endings still float around in the cultural memory, and the writers seem to take genuine pleasure in keeping the conversation alive without ever fully closing it. Which brings us back to the baby. Because Maggie Simpson, the 1-year-old who may or may not have intentionally shot one of the richest men in Springfield, is herself the subject of one of the most persistent and unsettling fan theories about the show. A theory that, once again, the show has never bothered to deny. Because Maggie Simpson, on the surface, is a baby, she doesn't talk. She sucks her pacifier. She crawls around the house. She's the youngest member of the family, often overlooked, frequently forgotten. Homer regularly forgets she exists. In one episode, he can't even remember her name. She is, for all appearances, the least significant Simpson. But if you actually track what Maggie does across the entire run of the show, a very different picture starts to emerge. She shot Mr. Burns. Whether that was accidental or intentional is, as we just discussed, still a matter of debate. But she picked up a gun and fired it. At a baby's age, she saved Homer's life in the episode Mo Baby Blues, catching him as he fell. She's been shown to be an expert shot with a rifle. In one Treehouse of Horror segment, she successfully fends off an alien invasion. In The Longest Daycare, the theatrical short that was nominated for an Academy Award, she demonstrates planning, problem-solving, and emotional intelligence that is frankly extraordinary for a child of any age, let alone a baby. And in the flash-forward episodes, Maggie's future is consistently the most impressive of any Simpson. While Bart bounces between dead-end jobs and Lisa becomes a stressed-out overachiever, Maggie becomes a famous musician who sells out shows in Beijing. In the episode Bart to the Future, she is the only Simpson child who seems to have genuinely thrived. The fan theory, and there are several variations of it, essentially argues that Maggie is the true genius of the Simpson family, not Lisa. Lisa is the obvious genius, the one who wears her intelligence on her sleeve, but Maggie may be something else entirely. A prodigy so advanced that she's operating on a level nobody around her can perceive, because she's trapped in a body that can't yet express what she knows. Some versions of the theory go darker than that. They point to the Burns shooting, to her calm demeanor in dangerous situations, to the way she observes rooms and waits until she's alone to act. And they suggest that Maggie isn't just a genius. She might be a sociopath, or at the very least, she might be a baby who understands far more about the world than anyone gives her credit for, and who is perfectly comfortable using that advantage. The pacifier moment at the end of Who Shot Mr. Burns is the strongest evidence for this reading, because that wasn't a baby mimicking a random action. That was a baby waiting until everyone had left the room, checking to make sure she was unobserved, and then performing a very specific gesture that referenced a very specific event. That's not what accidents look like. That's what intention looks like. And the show keeps giving Maggie these moments, over and over and over again. She does things that no 1-year-old should be able to do, and nobody in the show ever comments on it in a sustained way. It's treated as a running gag. But the running gag, if you take it seriously, paints a portrait of a child who is quietly exceptional and possibly frightening. The writers, to their credit, seem aware of the tension. They lean into it sometimes, playing Maggie's competence for laughs. Other times, they lean into the unsettling quality of it, but they never resolve it. They never have a character sit down and say Maggie is a genius, or Maggie is dangerous, or Maggie is just a normal baby who gets lucky. They let the ambiguity sit. And here's what I find really interesting about the Maggie conspiracy. It's not just about one character. It connects to a much bigger theory about the entire Simpson family. A theory that suggests Maggie isn't the only genius in the house. She might not even be the most impressive one. Because according to one of the most popular and well-argued fan theories about The Simpsons, every single member of the family is gifted. Every one of them. And the reason only Lisa seems smart is that Lisa is the only one who chooses to be. This theory has been around in various forms for years, but the basic version goes like this. The Simpsons, as a family, are all extraordinarily intelligent. Grandpa Abe accomplished incredible things in his youth, including serving in multiple wars, taking down Nazi spies, and apparently having a connection to every major historical event of the 20th century. Marge has excelled at virtually every profession she's ever tried, from painting to police work to real estate, often mastering skills in a matter of days that would take other people years. Bart, despite his reputation as an underachiever, has demonstrated an almost supernatural aptitude for languages, complex strategic planning, creative writing, and social manipulation. Maggie, as we just discussed, operates on a level that defies her age entirely. And Homer, well, Homer is the most interesting case of all. In season 12, there's an episode called HOMR. It's one of the best episodes of that era, honestly. In it, Homer discovers that the reason he's always been stupid is that there's a crayon lodged in his brain. It's been there since childhood. He jammed it up his nose when he was a kid, and it went straight into his frontal lobe. When the crayon is surgically removed, Homer becomes a genius. And I mean a genuine, certifiable genius. He's articulate, insightful, empathetic in new ways, and suddenly able to understand things that have eluded him his entire life. But here's the thing. Being smart makes Homer miserable. His friends at Moe's don't want to talk to him anymore. He starts noticing problems he was blissfully unaware of before. He becomes isolated. He loses the easy, comfortable relationships that defined his life. And at the end of the episode, Homer makes a conscious decision. He goes back to the hospital and has the crayon reinserted. He chooses stupidity. He chooses happiness. The fan theory takes this a step further and argues that this isn't just Homer's story. It's the entire family story. Every Simpson is brilliant, but with the exception of Lisa, every Simpson has made the choice, consciously or unconsciously, to suppress their intelligence. Because in the world of The Simpsons, being smart doesn't make you happy. It makes you lonely, anxious, and frustrated. Look at Grandpa. He did extraordinary things, but now he sits in a retirement home telling rambling stories that nobody believes. Look at Marge. She's capable of anything, but she chose to be a homemaker, to focus on her family, to live a simpler life. She's not unfulfilled. She made a choice. Look at Bart. The kid can learn a foreign language by listening to a tape once. He wrote an itchy and scratchy episode that won an industry award. He created the Angry Dad series. He broke into the Springfield Museum with Lisa, casually mentioning that his fingerprints are already on file with the police. He is, by every measure, a creative and strategic genius. But he chooses the prank life. He chooses mischief over achievement because, like Homer, he knows that achievement comes with expectations, pressure, and isolation. And then there's Lisa. Lisa is the one who embraces her intelligence. Lisa is the one who gets straight A's, plays the saxophone, reads above her grade level, and cares deeply about social justice. And Lisa is also consistently the most miserable member of the family. She's anxious. She struggles to make friends. She feels alienated from her peers. She carries the weight of the world on her 8-year-old shoulders. The theory argues that Lisa is the cautionary tale. She's what happens when a Simpson doesn't suppress their gifts. She's proof that the rest of the family made the right call. Ignorance in the Simpson family isn't a weakness. It's a survival strategy. I love this theory because it reframes the show in a way that adds genuine depth without contradicting anything we've seen on screen. Every piece of evidence it cites is real. Homer was literally made stupid by a crayon. Bart is literally a gifted writer. Marge literally succeeds at everything she tries. And Maggie literally performs feats that no baby should be capable of. The theory just connects the dots and asks a simple question. What if this pattern is intentional? And once again, the show has never denied it. No writer has come out and said, no, The Simpsons are not all geniuses. No showrunner has addressed it in a commentary track. It just sits there, supported by decades of evidence, quietly making the show more interesting. But let's move on from the Simpson family itself and talk about one of the most unexpectedly emotional theories about the show. This one is about Moe Zeislak, the bartender. And specifically, it's about the prank calls. If you've ever watched The Simpsons, you know the prank call routine. Bart calls Moe's Tavern. He asks for a person with a ridiculous name. Is there a Seymour Butts here? Or I'm looking for Amanda Hugginkiss. Moe falls for it every time. He calls out the name to the entire bar. Everyone laughs. Moe realizes he's been tricked, screams threats into the phone, and Bart hangs up giggling. It's one of the show's oldest and most beloved running gags, dating all the way back to the earliest seasons. But a Reddit user named Senor_Schnarf proposed a theory that completely changed how a lot of people see this gag. The theory is simple: Moe knows. Moe has always known. He knows it's Bart calling, and he plays along on purpose. The evidence is actually more convincing than you'd expect. For starters, it's always the same voice. Bart doesn't disguise his voice when he calls. He just talks in his normal Bart Simpson voice and asks for somebody with a fake name. And Moe has spoken to Bart in person many times. He knows what Bart sounds like. The idea that Moe, a man who has bartended in this town for decades and who interacts with the Simpson family regularly, cannot recognize the voice of his best customer's 10-year-old son is honestly a stretch. But the bigger piece of evidence comes from a specific scene in the show. There's an episode where Homer gets fired from the power plant and he's sitting at Moe's, drowning his sorrows. Marge sends Bart to the bar to bring Homer home. When Bart walks in, right after a prank call has just been made, Moe immediately recognizes him. He hears Bart's voice and lights up. He's genuinely happy to see the kid. There's no moment of, wait, that voice sounds familiar. There's no suspicion. Moe just greets Bart warmly, like he's glad to see him. And that's the theory in a nutshell. Moe doesn't fall for the prank calls. He lets them happen. Because the prank calls, in a weird way, are the closest thing Moe has to a relationship with Bart. And maybe, in an even sadder way, the prank calls are one of the few genuine interactions that make Moe feel alive. Because if you look at Moe across the entire series, the picture is bleak. He's lonely, deeply, almost unbearably lonely. He can't get a date. He has no real friends outside of the barflies. He's attempted suicide multiple times, and while the show usually plays these moments for dark comedy, they're there. They're part of his character. Moe is a man who is desperate for connection and terrible at finding it. The prank calls in this reading are a form of connection. Bart calls, and for a minute or two, Moe gets to be the butt of a joke. He gets to play a role. He gets to be part of something, even if that something is just a kid having fun at his expense. And maybe Moe understands that if he ever let on that he knows, if he ever said, "Bart, I know that's you, stop calling," the calls would stop. And one of the few small joys in his life would disappear. There's something genuinely touching about that interpretation. It takes one of the show's cheapest, simplest gags and turns it into something quietly heartbreaking. And here's what gets me: the show has never denied it. Nobody from the writing staff has ever said, no, Moe is genuinely being fooled every time. In fact, if anything, the show has leaned into the ambiguity. Moe's affection for the Simpson family, and for Bart specifically, has been a recurring element across many seasons. There are episodes where Moe is protective of the kids, where he risks things for them, where his love for the family is played completely straight. The idea that he'd tolerate Bart's prank calls out of affection isn't just plausible. It's kind of beautiful. And now, since we're talking about characters who behave in ways the show never fully explains, let's talk about one of the strangest recurring figures in all of Springfield. A man, or possibly several men, or possibly an entire underground civilization named Hans Moleman. If you watch The Simpsons regularly, you know Hans Moleman. He's the tiny, ancient-looking, incredibly unlucky man who shows up in the background of countless episodes. He's voiced by Dan Castellaneta. He looks like he's about 90 years old, and he dies constantly. That's not an exaggeration. Hans Moleman dies or is placed in situations where survival is essentially impossible. In episode after episode after episode, he gets hit by cars. He gets buried alive. He gets set on fire. He gets crushed. He gets run over. He gets electrocuted. In one memorable scene, he's drilling into his own skull at Mr. Burns' request. In the Treehouse of Horror segment, I've grown a costume on your face, he's turned into a mole despite not wearing a costume. His most famous moment is probably the short film Man Getting Hit by Football from the episode A Star is Burns, which is exactly as described. A man getting hit in the groin by a football. It's 10 seconds long. It's called art by some. Not by Lisa, but by some. The running joke is that Hans Moleman is the universe's punching bag. He exists to suffer. He's the Simpsons equivalent of South Park's Kenny McCormick, dying in increasingly creative and absurd ways and then showing up perfectly fine in the next episode with no explanation. But the fan theory about Hans Moleman takes this joke and turns it into something genuinely weird. A Reddit user named Aaron3 proposed that there isn't one Hans Moleman. There are many, an entire race of them, a civilization of mole-human hybrids living beneath Springfield, sending members to the surface one at a time in a slow, patient attempt to infiltrate human society. Sounds insane, right? Except the show literally supports this. In a season 11 episode called Hello Gutter, Hello Fatter, Homer stumbles into an underground fortress, and there, ruling over it, is Hans Moleman. He's dressed in ceremonial robes like a king or a high priest. He commands earthquake machines. He declares, there is no escape from the fortress of the moles. The scene is played for comedy, obviously. Homer escapes easily, and the underground lair is never mentioned again. But it exists in canon. Homer literally discovered an underground mole civilization led by Hans Moleman. And then there's the age issue. Hans Moleman's age is wildly inconsistent. One driver's license says he was born in 1921. Another says 1961. He once claimed to be 31 years old, implying that his elderly appearance is due to heavy drinking rather than actual age. A college student in one episode calls him an 80-year-old man. He was apparently the mayor of Springfield at some point in the past, which would mean he's older than 31. None of it adds up. Unless, of course, there are multiple mole men, each with their own identification, their own history, and their own tragically short lifespan on the surface. The theory suggests that the mole people are sending members topside one by one, disguised as this generic little old man trying to take over surface jobs and integrate into Springfield society. But they keep getting killed by the general chaos and violence of Springfield life, often because of Homer's antics. As fast as they can send a new one up, the previous one gets crushed, burned, or exploded. It's an invasion that is being thwarted not by any deliberate defense, but by the sheer incompetence and danger of living in Springfield. I find this one genuinely delightful, and once again, the show has never denied it. They've never explained why Moleman keeps coming back from death. They've never addressed the age inconsistencies. They animated an entire underground mole civilization and then just moved on like it was nothing. The information is right there in the show, and they've let fans do whatever they want with it. Now, we've been talking about characters whose true nature is hidden beneath the surface. And there's one more character I want to discuss in this vein because the theory about her is darker than the others. And it involves someone who, for most of the show's run, seemed like nothing more than a sweet, quiet, devout neighbor's wife. Maud Flanders. If you remember Maud, you probably remember her as Ned Flanders' wife. The quiet one, the religious one, the one who smiled politely and went along with whatever Ned said. She was, by all appearances, the perfect wife for the perfect neighbor. And then, in season 11, she was killed off the show. She was hit by a t-shirt cannon at a NASCAR event. It was sudden, unexpected, and played for dark comedy. And the real-world reason for her death was a contract dispute with her voice actress, Maggie Roswell. But within the show, Maud's death was treated as a genuine loss. Ned mourned her deeply. It affected his character for years. But a fan theory posted by a user called Diversity Pumpkin on the No Homers fan site proposed something that recontextualizes everything about Maud. The theory is that Maud Flanders was a sociopath, and that she might have been trying to get rid of Ned for years before she herself was killed. The evidence is circumstantial, but there's a surprising amount of it. When Ned snaps and is institutionalized after a hurricane destroys his house, the whole town is there. Marge is there. Homer is there. The townspeople rally together to try and help. But Maud is nowhere to be found. She's not at the hospital. She's not offering comfort. She's absent from one of the worst moments of her husband's life. When a comet is about to hit Springfield and the townspeople crowd into Ned's bomb shelter, which he built specifically to protect his family, Ned is forced out of the shelter by the crowd. He's literally pushed out of his own refuge to make room for other people. And Maud doesn't protest. She doesn't fight for him. She doesn't say, "No, this is my husband's shelter, he stays." She just lets it happen. There are several other instances where Ned is in danger and Maud either doesn't react, doesn't help, or actively seems unconcerned. It's not the behavior of someone who loves their partner. It's the behavior of someone who has emotionally detached from them and is simply going through the motions. And then there's the bed detail. It's a small thing, but fans have noted that in shots showing the Flanders bedroom, the imprint on Maud's side of the bed faces away from Ned. Every night she slept facing the opposite direction, turned away from her husband. It's the kind of detail that could mean nothing, or it could mean everything. Now, I want to be clear. This theory is darker than the others we've discussed tonight, and it's entirely speculative. There's no interview where a writer says, "Yes, we intended Maud to be secretly terrible." But the evidence is there in the show, scattered across multiple episodes, and nobody has ever addressed it. The show killed Maud off for production reasons, but within the narrative, her character remains unexamined. We never got a deep dive into who she really was. We never got an episode exploring their marriage from her perspective. She was just there, and then she wasn't. And all these little details that fans have collected over the years just float around with no resolution. The thing that ties the Maud theory to our broader theme tonight is this. The show could have given Maud depth at any point. They could have written an episode about her inner life. They could have made her complicated, or they could have made her unambiguously loving. They did neither. They left her as a blank space. And blank spaces in a show with millions of obsessive fans always get filled with theories. Speaking of things that the show never addresses, let's talk about money. Because there is a question that has been nagging Simpsons fans for literally decades. And it's one of the most basic questions you could possibly ask about a family sitcom. How does Homer Simpson afford his life? Think about it for a second. Homer works as a nuclear safety inspector at the Springfield nuclear power plant. That's his job. He's terrible at it. He sleeps through most of his shifts. He's caused multiple meltdowns and safety violations. By any reasonable standard, he should have been fired hundreds of times over. And yet he not only keeps his job, but he somehow maintains a lifestyle that doesn't add up. The Simpsons live in a large 2-story house at 742 Evergreen Terrace. It's not a mansion, but it's a solid, spacious home with a garage, a backyard, and multiple bedrooms. They own 2 cars. They have 3 children. They go on vacations constantly, not just road trips. The Simpsons have been to Japan, Australia, Brazil, France, England, Italy, and Africa. They've been to space. They've been on cruises. They have been, by some fan estimates, to more than 50 countries or notable destinations over the course of the show. How? On a nuclear safety inspector's salary? In a single-income household? With 3 kids? The show occasionally acknowledges this. There are episodes about the family's finances. Homer gets fired and has to find new work. Marge pinches pennies. They struggle to make ends meet, but these episodes never fully reconcile the math because the math doesn't work. Not even close. Enter the fan theories, and there are actually 3 separate theories that taken together might explain everything. The first is the Denver Broncos theory. In season 8, in the episode You Only Move Twice, Homer briefly works for a man named Hank Scorpio. Scorpio is essentially a Bond villain. He's charming, friendly, and genuinely supportive of Homer, and he's also trying to take over the world. Homer helps him succeed, and in gratitude, Scorpio gives Homer a gift. Homer wanted the Dallas Cowboys. Scorpio gives him the Denver Broncos instead. Homer is disappointed. He wanted the Cowboys. The episode ends with him grumbling about the Broncos, and the show never mentions it again. But here's the thing. The Denver Broncos are a real NFL franchise, and they're worth a lot of money. By 2012, estimates that fans have tracked, the Broncos were valued at around $1.16 billion. Even if Homer received partial ownership, even if the gift was structured in some way that limited his control, the fact remains that a Reddit user named Somewhere Cheap pointed out that Homer Simpson is technically a billionaire. He owns an NFL franchise. He just doesn't seem to realize it, or doesn't care, or has never figured out how to monetize it. And that is such a perfectly Homer response. He was given $1 billion asset and was upset because it wasn't the team he wanted. So he presumably shoved the ownership papers in a drawer somewhere and went back to eating donuts. The second theory involves the B Sharps. In Season 5, the episode Homer's Barbershop Quartet reveals that Homer was once part of a barbershop quartet that achieved massive fame. They won a Grammy, they were compared to the Beatles, they had a national following, and while the group eventually broke up, like all groups do, the theory argues that Homer would still be receiving royalties from their recordings. Residual income from a Grammy-winning album even decades later could be significant, especially if the group's music is still being sold or licensed. And the third piece of the puzzle came much later, in Season 36. In an episode that explored Grandpa's past, it was revealed that Abe Simpson made a secret deal with Mr. Burns. The details of the deal guaranteed that Homer would have a job at the power plant no matter what, regardless of his performance, regardless of how many mistakes he made. And according to the episode, Homer's total count of professional errors was 742. The same number as his home address, 742 Evergreen Terrace, which fans immediately noticed. So the deal explains why Homer never gets permanently fired. Burns is contractually obligated to keep him employed, and the Denver Broncos plus B Sharps royalties explain how Homer can afford international vacations on what should be a modest salary. Put all three together, and the financial mystery of the Simpsons household suddenly makes sense. What I find interesting about these three theories is that each one is based on something that actually happened in the show. These aren't fan inventions. Homer really did receive the Broncos. Homer really was in a Grammy-winning group. Grandpa really did make that deal. The show just never connected these dots or used them to explain Homer's finances. They exist as isolated plot points in isolated episodes, and the writers seem perfectly content to leave them that way. Nobody has ever officially said, the reason Homer can afford his life is because of the Broncos, the royalties, and the deal with Burns. But nobody has ever said that isn't the reason either. The information is right there. It just has never been assembled. Now, if the financial mystery of The Simpsons can be explained by connecting dots the show has scattered across 30 years of episodes, what about an even bigger mystery? A mystery about the town itself. Because Springfield, the fictional city where The Simpsons takes place, is genuinely one of the most confusing settings in all of television. And there's a theory about it that is so strange, so ambitious, and so oddly well supported that once you hear it, you will never look at the show the same way. The basic question is simple. Where is Springfield? You would think after 37 seasons, this would have been settled long ago. But it hasn't. And the reason it hasn't is that the show has gone out of its way for decades to make it impossible to answer. Springfield has a coastline. It has mountains. It has a desert. It has farmland. It has a gorge. It has a nuclear power plant, a harbor, an airport, a monorail, and at various points it appears to border every geographical feature in the continental United States simultaneously. West Springfield, according to one episode, is 3 times the size of Texas. That is physically impossible for a suburb of a medium-sized American city. But there it is, stated as fact within the show. The state has been identified differently at different points. In the season 11 finale, Behind the Laughter, which is formatted as a VH1 Behind the Music parody, the narrator states that the Simpsons live in northern Kentucky. This was presented as a genuine revelation, and the writers even commented on it, saying they didn't think the show would last much longer, so they decided to finally reveal the state. But then the show did last much longer, and later episodes contradicted the Kentucky answer entirely. Matt Groening, the creator of the show, addressed the question directly in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine. He said that Springfield was inspired by Springfield, Oregon, the city near where he grew up. But he deliberately chose the name Springfield because it's one of the most common city names in America. There are Springfields in dozens of states. Groening said, "I don't want to ruin it for people. Whenever people say it's Springfield, Ohio, or Springfield, Massachusetts, or Springfield, wherever, I always go, yup, that's right." He wanted every viewer to feel like Springfield was their Springfield. The ambiguity was intentional from day one. But fans, being fans, took the ambiguity as a challenge. And one particularly dedicated internet detective went through every clue in every episode and, through a process of elimination, narrowed Springfield's location down to Maine. The reasoning was based on geography, climate references, and clues like the proximity to ocean, mountains, and farmland. It's a thorough and impressively argued case. However, there's another theory that takes a completely different approach. Instead of trying to figure out which real state Springfield is in, this theory argues that Springfield isn't in any state. It isn't in any fixed location at all. This is called the Tesseract theory, and it proposes that Springfield exists outside of normal space and time. The idea is that Springfield occupies something like a tesseract, a four-dimensional space that can shift, expand, and contract depending on the needs of the narrative. This would explain why Springfield can have a coast, a desert, mountains, and farmland simultaneously. It would explain why buildings appear and disappear between episodes. It would explain why West Springfield can be 3 times the size of Texas. It would explain why the town can be next to one state in one episode and a completely different state in another. The theory also explains why the characters never age. If Springfield exists outside of normal time, then the passage of time within it doesn't follow the rules of the outside world. A year can pass in the real world and nothing changes in Springfield. 10 years can pass and Bart is still in 4th grade. The town is stuck, not because of lazy writing, but because the space it occupies doesn't experience time the way we do. I'll be honest, this one is more philosophical than evidentiary. It's not based on specific episodes or hidden clues. It's based on the accumulated weight of 37 years of geographical impossibilities and the simple observation that Springfield cannot exist in any real space. The theory just takes that observation and gives it a name. And once again, the show has never committed to a location. They seem to genuinely enjoy the confusion. Every time a clue seems to narrow it down, another episode contradicts it. Every time a fan thinks they've cracked the code, the show throws in a new piece of geography that makes the puzzle impossible again. It feels deliberate. It feels like a game. And the writers are winning because after 800 episodes, we still don't know where Springfield is. Since we're already talking about time and space behaving strangely in The Simpsons, there's one more character-level theory I want to cover before we move on. And this one is about Grandpa Abe Simpson. Grandpa is, on the surface, a senile old man. He lives in the Springfield retirement castle. He tells long, rambling stories that go nowhere. He falls asleep mid-sentence. He contradicts himself constantly. His memories don't line up. He claims to have been in World War II, the Korean War, and Vietnam. He claims to have been a fighter pilot, a spy, a boxer, and a musician. He claims to have met every historical figure from Hitler to the Beatles to the Dalai Lama. And none of it is consistent. None of it tracks. The standard interpretation is that Grandpa is simply old and confused. His mind is going. His stories are a mix of real memories, exaggerations, and complete fabrications. He's an unreliable narrator in the most literal sense. But there's a fan theory that offers a different explanation. The theory is that Grandpa Abe Simpson is a time traveler, and his inconsistent memories aren't the product of senility. They're the product of having lived through multiple timelines. Now, this sounds completely ridiculous at first, but the show actually provides some supporting evidence. In the Treehouse of Horror segment, Time and Punishment from Season 6, Homer builds a time machine out of a toaster. He travels back to the age of the dinosaurs and accidentally changes the timeline multiple times. Each time he returns to the present, Springfield has been altered in some significant way. At one point, it's a fascist dystopia. At another point, it rains donuts. Homer keeps going back and trying to fix things, making it worse each time. Before Homer goes back in time, Abe gives him a very specific piece of advice. He tells Homer not to touch anything while he's in the past. This is, on its face, standard common sense advice about time travel. Don't change anything. Don't disrupt the timeline. But the theory proposes that Abe's advice was suspiciously specific, that he knew exactly what the dangers of time travel were because he had experienced them himself. If Abe is a time traveler, or if he at some point in his life had access to time travel technology, it would explain virtually everything about his character. His inconsistent historical recollections would make sense because he actually was present at contradictory historical events, just in different timelines. His confusion about dates and places would be a symptom of temporal displacement, not mental decline. His wild stories that seem impossible would be impossible only if you assumed a single linear timeline. And there's a subtler version of the theory that doesn't require Abe to have personally traveled through time. Instead, it suggests that Abe is a victim of other people's time travel. If Homer messed with the timeline in Time and Punishment, and if other characters have done similar things in various Treehouse of Horror segments, then the timeline of the Simpsons universe has been altered multiple times. Abe, being the oldest living member of the family, would have the longest memory, and therefore the most accumulated damage from these alterations. His contradictory memories might be real memories from contradictory timelines, all jumbled together in the mind of a man who has lived through more versions of history than anyone should have to. It's a wild theory, and I fully acknowledge that it's probably just meant to be a joke. Grandpa tells crazy stories because crazy stories are funny. That's likely the real explanation, but the show has never explained the inconsistencies. They've never had a character say, Grandpa is making things up, in a way that definitively settles the question. They've never addressed why his war stories don't line up with any single historical timeline. And they gave him that suspiciously specific time travel advice, which at the very least suggests the writers were aware of the theory and chose to have a little fun with it. That's what I keep coming back to with all of these theories. The writers know. They know what the fans are saying. They know what the theories are. And instead of shutting them down, they keep planting little details that could be coincidences or could be confirmations, and then they walk away without saying which. Let's shift gears a little and talk about something that's hiding in plain sight. Something that once you notice it, you genuinely cannot unnotice. I want to talk about the Krusty the Clown show. Krusty the Clown is, within the world of The Simpsons, Springfield's most famous entertainer. He's a children's television host. He has his own show. He has merchandise, a burger chain, a line of products with his face on them, a cereal brand, and at one point, even a home pregnancy test. Bart idolizes him. Lisa tolerates him. He's been on the air within the show's universe for decades. And every single child in Springfield watches his program. But have you ever actually watched what happens on the Krusty the Clown show? Because it is, by any reasonable standard, absolutely not appropriate for children. Let's start with Itchy and Scratchy, the cartoon within a cartoon that airs as part of Krusty's show. Every single episode features extreme, graphic, detailed violence. A cat gets dismembered. A mouse gets incinerated. Eyes are gouged out. Limbs are torn off. Organs are removed. Axes, chainsaws, explosives, acid, lava, and nuclear weapons are all standard tools of the trade. The violence in Itchy and Scratchy makes Tom and Jerry look like a nature documentary, and it airs on a children's show during the daytime in Springfield. Then there's Krusty himself. On his own show, during segments aimed at children, Krusty openly discusses his gambling addiction, his womanizing, his substance abuse, his tax fraud, his legal troubles, and his various personal failures. He's verbally and physically abusive to his sidekick, Sideshow Mel. He chain smokes. He's been shown drinking on camera. He makes cynical, bitter comments about his life and his career. He once used a food drive, which was supposed to feed needy families, as the basis for a sloppy obstacle course competition. He is, in every conceivable way, the opposite of what a children's entertainer should be. And here's the theory: the Krusty the Clown show isn't actually for kids. It's an adult show. A Reddit user named Dangerous Busen proposed that Krusty is essentially the Springfield equivalent of Stephen Colbert on The Colbert Report. He's a satirical character performing an exaggerated version of a children's clown for an audience that is in on the joke. The adults of Springfield understand that Krusty is a comedy act. The violence of Itchy and Scratchy is dark humor for a mature audience. The confessional segments where Krusty talks about his gambling and his romantic disasters are adult comedy, not children's programming. The reason Springfield's kids watch it is simply that nobody is monitoring their television intake. Homer and Marge don't seem to pay close attention to what Bart and Lisa are watching. And in a town where children regularly roam unsupervised, where Bart can skateboard to the nuclear power plant without anyone noticing, it makes perfect sense that kids would be watching adult programming without any parental filter. The evidence actually stacks up pretty well if you look at it. Within the show, Krusty is consistently treated as a comedy legend, not a kid's entertainer, a legitimate comedy figure. He has relationships with other celebrities. He's done Vegas residencies. He's appeared on late-night talk shows. He has the career profile of an adult comedian, not a PBS Kids host. The only people who seem to think of Krusty as a children's entertainer are the children themselves. The adults of Springfield seem to regard him as something else entirely. And think about the itchy and scratchy dimension of this. In multiple episodes, the show explores the creation of itchy and scratchy cartoons. The writers are shown as exhausted, cynical professionals who are writing for a specific audience. They aren't trying to educate kids or promote positive values. They're crafting elaborate comedy violence for an audience that appreciates craft. The humor of itchy and scratchy is structural. It's about the setup and payoff of increasingly creative destruction. That's adult humor. That's the humor of animation professionals making content for other animation professionals and comedy fans. If you frame the Krusty Show through this lens, a lot of the show's recurring gags make more sense. The parents of Springfield aren't negligent for letting their kids watch graphic violence. They probably don't even know their kids are watching it, because they think of Krusty as the late-night comedy guy, not the Saturday morning cartoon guy. The kids stumbled onto it because it looks like a clown show and nobody told them otherwise. And once again, the show has never addressed this directly. Nobody has ever said Krusty's show is an adult program, but nobody has said it isn't either. The evidence is all there, baked into decades of episodes, and the writers have simply let it sit. I think there's something really meta about this particular theory too, because The Simpsons itself is, in a way, exactly what this theory describes. It's an animated show that was initially marketed toward a general audience, maybe even leaning toward family viewing, but whose actual content is layered with adult humor, social commentary, political satire, and references that only adults would understand. The Simpsons is an adult show that kids watch, and within the show, the Krusty the Clown Show is an adult show that kids watch. It's a mirror within a mirror. Now, staying with the meta theme for a moment, I want to talk about a theory that connects the show to its creator in a way that is simultaneously very simple and very strange. This is the theory that Bart Simpson will grow up to be Matt Groening. Matt Groening, for those who might not know, is the cartoonist who created The Simpsons. He based the characters on his own family. Homer's named after his father, Homer Groening. Marge is named after his mother, Margaret Groening. Lisa and Maggie are named after his sisters. And Bart, the eldest child, the troublemaker, the one who acts out and defies authority and uses humor as a weapon, is widely understood to be based on Groening himself. The name Bart is even an anagram of brat. The theory, proposed by Reddit user Just Embarrassing, takes this biographical connection and extends it forward in time. If Bart is based on young Matt Groening, then maybe Bart's future mirrors Groening's actual life. And what did Groening do with his life? He grew up. He channeled his rebellious energy into creative work. He became a cartoonist. He drew a comic strip called Life in Hell. And then he created a television show about a dysfunctional family, a show based on the people he grew up with. The theory proposes that Bart will eventually do the same thing. He'll grow up, mature just enough to be functional, and channel his intelligence, his creativity, and his deep understanding of his own family into a creative career. And the project that will define his life will be a show about his family, a show called The Simpsons. And here's the thing. The show actually supports this more than you might expect. Bart has been shown to be a genuinely talented writer and performer. In the episode of The Front, Bart and Lisa secretly write itchy and scratchy episodes under Grandpa's name, and their scripts are so good that they win industry awards. In Angry Dad, Bart creates an animated series based on Homer's rage, and it wins an Academy Award. He didn't just make something good, he made something that was professionally recognized as excellent. Bart has also been shown to be linguistically gifted. In the episode where the family goes to Brazil, Bart casually mentions that he learned Spanish by listening to a tape. He learned the wrong language for the trip, which is played for laughs, but the fact that he learned an entire language from a tape is itself remarkable. In another episode, he picks up French while living with a family in France, absorbing it almost unconsciously. In various flash-forward episodes, Bart's future careers have included Supreme Court Justice, demolition company owner, and various creative roles. His trajectory is inconsistent, which is part of the show's running joke about the future being unpredictable. But the thread of creativity runs through all of them. The theory argues that Bart's life follows a familiar arc. A smart, creative kid who rejects the system, coasts through school on natural talent rather than effort, and eventually finds his calling not in traditional success, but in art. An art that draws directly from his own life. His overbearing but lovable father. His anxious, protective mother. His overachieving sister. His mysterious baby sibling. His weird, wonderful, impossible hometown. Groening named the family after his own. Bart might one day name a show after his. The show has never denied this connection. Groening has spoken openly about basing the characters on his family. The parallels between Bart's creative talents and Groening's career are right there for anyone to see, and the show keeps adding to the evidence season after season without ever acknowledging the theory directly. I think there's something lovely about this one. It's not dark. It's not unsettling. It's just the idea that the troublemaker kid we've been watching for over 30 years is going to be okay. That all that energy and intelligence and chaos is going to find its way into something meaningful. And that the show we're watching might, in some recursive way, be that something. All right, before we get to the really big stuff, there are 2 more theories I want to cover tonight because they're just too good to skip. And the first one is about a character who appeared in a single episode and left behind something much darker than anyone realized at the time. I'm talking about Lyle Lanley, the Monorail Man. Marge versus. The Monorail is one of the most beloved episodes of The Simpsons. It aired in season 4 and was written by Conan O'Brien, which tells you something about the caliber of talent that was in the writer's room during the Golden Age. The plot is straightforward. Springfield comes into some money after Mr. Burns is fined for illegal waste dumping, and a smooth-talking salesman named Lyle Lanley shows up and convinces the town to spend it all on a monorail system. On the surface, Lanley is a con man, a grifter. He takes the town's money, builds a shoddy monorail that's designed to fail, and plans to disappear before anyone figures out what happened. Marge is the only person who sees through him. She investigates, discovers that he's done this before in other towns, and eventually the town is saved, barely, when the monorail goes haywire on its maiden voyage. But there's a fan theory that Lanley isn't just a con man, he's a serial killer. The reasoning goes like this. If Lanley just wanted money, he could have taken it and run. That's what con men do. They get the cash and disappear. But Lanley doesn't do that. He sticks around. He personally oversees the construction of a monorail system that he knows will fail. He builds it to fail. He designs it to crash. And Marge, during her investigation, actually finds a notebook in which Lanley has drawn pictures of passengers dying in a monorail wreck. Not crashing, dying, in flames. That's not the behavior of a thief. A thief would want to avoid any connection to violence. A thief would build something that sort of works, collect the fee, and leave town before anyone noticed the flaws. Lanley builds something that is guaranteed to cause mass casualties, and he has illustrations of those casualties in his personal belongings. He's not stealing from Springfield. He's trying to kill people, and the theory suggests that this isn't his first time. Lanley mentions that he's sold monorails to other towns: Brockway, Ogdenville, North Haverbrook. When Marge visits North Haverbrook, she finds a devastated town. The implication is clear. Lanley's monorails have caused destruction before. The pattern isn't sell a monorail and skip town. The pattern is sell a monorail, watch it destroy a community, and move on to the next target. If you take this theory seriously, Lyle Lanley is one of the most disturbing characters ever to appear on The Simpsons. He's not a lovable rogue or a charming scammer. He's a man who gets off on engineering disasters. He's a mass murderer who uses municipal infrastructure as his weapon. I think about this one a lot, honestly, because the evidence is right there in the episode. Conan O'Brien wrote a character who draws pictures of people dying in his monorail. That's not something you include by accident. And yet the episode frames Lanley as a comedic villain, a song and dance man who tricks a gullible town. The darkness underneath is never addressed. It's never resolved. He just disappears from the show after one episode, and nobody ever talks about the drawings in his notebook. And here's the second bonus theory. This one circles back to a conspiracy we touched on earlier tonight, the Stonecutters. Because there's a theory that Bart Simpson was already a member of the Stonecutters before Homer ever joined. In the season 6 episode, Homer the Great, Homer discovers that Lenny and Carl are members of a secret society called the Stonecutters. It's a Freemason parody. They have secret handshakes, a members-only bar, and an enormous amount of influence over Springfield's institutions. Homer desperately wants in, and he eventually gets membership through Grandpa Abe, who turns out to be a longtime member. The fan theory, put together by a Reddit user named TiePiper93, argues that Bart was already a stonecutter through Grandpa Abe's membership. The evidence is subtle but interesting. Early in the episode, when Homer first starts noticing strange behavior from Lenny and Carl, he says he feels like there's a conspiracy going on. Bart's response is telling. He says with a wink, "Yeah, a conspiracy." Do you think maybe Lenny and Carl were involved in the Kennedy assassination? It's played as a typical Bart joke, but think about it. Why would a 10-year-old reference the Kennedy assassination in this specific context? Why would he wink? If you look at it through the lens of someone who already knows about the Stonecutters, already knows what they're capable of, the joke reads very differently. Bart isn't making a random reference. He's making an insider joke. He's hinting at something he already knows. The theory also points out that Bart seems to know the Stonecutters' lingo and behavior when he's eventually exposed to it. He's not surprised. He's not confused. He acts like someone who is already familiar with the organization. And then there's the broader question of why Bart never gets in serious trouble. He vandalizes. He pulls fire alarms. He trespasses. He commits what would be, in the real world, actual crimes. And yet the consequences are always minimal. He gets detention, sure, but he's never expelled. He's never arrested in any lasting way. Principal Skinner threatens and blusters, but never follows through with anything serious. Could this be because Skinner is a stonecutter? Because the police chief, Wiggum, might be a stonecutter? Because the entire institutional structure of Springfield is influenced by an organization that happens to include Bart's grandfather, and by extension has an interest in protecting Bart? It's a stretch. I'll admit that freely, but it's a fun stretch, and the details in the episode are genuinely there. Bart's wink, his familiarity with the organization, his seemingly inexplicable ability to avoid serious consequences for serious misbehavior. The theory takes all of these things and suggests that there's a hidden network looking out for him, whether he knows it or not. And once more, the show has never said this isn't the case. The Stonecutters episode is treated as a standalone comedy story, but the details fans have pulled from it keep the theory alive. And the writers, who are clearly aware of fan discussions, have never gone back to clarify. I think there's a reason these theories are so much fun to talk about. And it's not just that The Simpsons has been on so long that there's an overwhelming amount of material to analyze. It's that the show was built by incredibly smart people who loved hiding details, planting Easter eggs, and rewarding close attention. The writer's room during the Golden Age was packed with Harvard math graduates, former National Lampoon writers, and people who thought about comedy the way engineers think about bridges. Everything had structure. Everything had purpose. And when you build a show with that much intentionality, every unexplained detail starts to feel like a clue. Which brings us to what might be the biggest conspiracy of all. The one that ties everything together. The one that explains why The Simpsons seems to know things it shouldn't know. Why it seems to predict the future. And why, despite decades of fan scrutiny, the show has never fully pulled back the curtain on its own secrets. We need to talk about the predictions. If you've spent any time on the internet in the last 10 years, you've probably seen the memes. The Simpsons predicted it over and over and over. An episode shows something, and then years or decades later, that thing happens in real life, and the internet explodes. The Simpsons did it again. They knew. How did they know? The list of so-called predictions is genuinely impressive, and tonight I want to walk through the big ones properly, because there's a lot of misinformation floating around, and I want to separate the things that actually happen from the things that have been exaggerated or taken out of context. And then, once we've looked at the real ones, I want to talk about the conspiracy theory that ties them all together. Because the way the show has handled this reputation is, I think, the most interesting conspiracy of them all. Let's start with the biggest one. The one that put The Simpsons predicted it into the mainstream consciousness. The Trump presidency. In March of the year 2000, The Simpsons aired a season 11 episode called Bart to the Future. In it, Bart has a vision of the future where Lisa has become the President of the United States. And during her inauguration, Lisa's staff mentions that she's inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump. That line was written and aired 16 years before Donald Trump was elected president. 16 years. And the show didn't bury it in the background or hide it as an Easter egg. It's a spoken line of dialogue, a named reference to a specific person being president of the United States more than a decade and a half before it happened. Now, there's context that's important here. In the year 2000, Donald Trump was not a completely random choice. He had already floated the idea of running for president at that point. He had made public statements about potentially seeking the Reform Party nomination. The writers have said that the joke was based on the idea of picking the most absurd, most unlikely person who might actually run. Trump was already a public figure associated with wealth and ambition and self-promotion. The joke wasn't, what if a random person became president? It was, what if the most ridiculous possible candidate actually won? But still, they got it right. 16 years early, and the show has never really tried to downplay this one. They seem genuinely proud of it, or at least amused by it. Al Jean has tweeted about it multiple times. The show has referenced it in later episodes. It's become part of the show's mythology in a way that the writers clearly enjoy. The second big prediction is the Disney-Fox merger. In a 1998 episode called When You Dish Upon a Star, there's a brief shot of the 20th Century Fox studio lot, and on the sign out front it reads, "A division of Walt Disney Company." In 2019, 21 years later, the Walt Disney Company completed its acquisition of 21st Century Fox's entertainment assets. 21st Century Fox literally became a division of Disney. The sign in the episode was, in hindsight, perfectly accurate. Again, context matters. In 1998, media consolidation was already a trend. Disney had been acquiring companies for years. Fox was a major entertainment conglomerate. The joke was about corporate takeovers and the absurdity of everything being owned by Disney. It was satire, not prophecy, but the satire turned out to be precisely correct about the specific outcome. Disney bought Fox. The sign on the lot changed, essentially, to what The Simpsons had shown 2 decades earlier. Then there are the technology predictions. In various episodes, the show depicted things that looked a lot like smartwatches, video calling, autocorrect mishaps on mobile devices, and other technologies that didn't exist at the time but later became commonplace. The smartwatch one is frequently cited. In a 1995 episode, a character is shown speaking into a watch-like device on their wrist. The Apple Watch came out 20 years later. The image comparison has gone viral countless times. There are also the more specific, almost eerie ones. The Simpsons depicted a tiger attacking performers at a Las Vegas show. Years later, Roy Horn of Siegfried and Roy was attacked by a white tiger during a performance. The show depicted a tomato-tobacco hybrid plant. In reality, researchers later experimented with similar genetic modification concepts. The show depicted a three-eyed fish living near a nuclear power plant. Actual three-eyed fish have been found near nuclear facilities. And then there are the ones that are frequently cited but don't quite hold up under scrutiny. The Simpsons is often credited with predicting the Ebola virus outbreak, but the episode in question actually references a different fictional disease. They're credited with predicting the discovery of the Higgs boson particle, based on a complex equation that appears on a blackboard in an episode. And while the math in that equation is genuinely impressive and was contributed by a writer who was a former mathematician, the connection to the Higgs boson is more of a fun coincidence than a literal prediction. The point is, some of the predictions are real and genuinely impressive. Others have been exaggerated by the internet. And the show itself has been smart about where the line falls. They've never claimed to be able to predict the future, but they've also never worked very hard to debunk the myth. Because the myth is incredibly valuable to them. Think about it from a business perspective. The Simpsons is the longest-running scripted primetime show in American history. It has been on the air for over 35 years. Keeping people interested in a show that old is incredibly difficult. You need fresh hooks, fresh reasons for people to talk about you, fresh ways to stay relevant. And The Simpsons predicted it is, from that perspective, the greatest marketing tool the show has ever had. Every time something happens in the news that vaguely resembles a Simpsons episode, the internet does the show's marketing for free. Memes get shared millions of times, articles get written, YouTube videos get made. People who haven't watched The Simpsons in years suddenly remember it exists. The show stays in the cultural conversation not because of its current episodes, but because of this persistent, impossible-to-kill idea that it can see the future. And the show feeds this. They don't deny it. They don't go on record saying, look, we had 800 episodes covering every conceivable topic, and statistically, some of them were bound to line up with future events. They could say that. It's the truth, but they don't, because the mystery is more useful than the explanation. This is, I think, the meta-conspiracy at the heart of everything we've talked about tonight. The Simpsons doesn't predict the future. It satirizes the present so thoroughly and across such a vast number of episodes that overlap with the future is statistically inevitable. If you write 800 episodes about every aspect of American culture, politics, technology, entertainment, and daily life, some of those episodes are going to accidentally describe things that haven't happened yet. It's not prophecy, it's probability. But here's what makes it a conspiracy worth talking about. The show knows this. The writers know this. They understand the math. They understand why the predictions seem to happen. And they have made a deliberate choice not to explain it publicly. Because the explanation is boring and the mystery is magic. There's actually a name for this kind of thing in statistics. It's related to the concept of the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, where you fire a bunch of shots at a barn wall and then draw a target around the tightest cluster. The Simpsons fired 800 episodes at the wall of American culture. Some of them clustered around real events, and the internet drew a target around those clusters and called it prediction. But even knowing this, I can't pretend the Trump one isn't wild. 16 years, by name, the specific word, president. That one genuinely sends a chill down my spine every time I think about it. The writer's room of The Simpsons during its golden era, roughly seasons 3 through 8, was one of the most intellectually stacked creative environments in television history. Conan O'Brien wrote there before he became a late-night host. Al Jean studied mathematics at Harvard. Mike Rice was a math prodigy. Jeff Martin was a Harvard Lampoon president. David Cohen, who later co-created Futurama, was a physics and computer science graduate. John Swartzwelder, who wrote more episodes than anyone else, was a legendarily private and brilliantly eccentric figure who once had a booth permanently reserved at a coffee shop so he could write there every day. These were not people who wrote jokes randomly. They were people who thought deeply about systems, about patterns, about how societies work and where they're heading. When they satirized technology, they did it from a place of genuine understanding. When they satirized politics, they did it with an awareness of historical cycles and political trends. When they made jokes about corporate consolidation, they were extrapolating from real data about media ownership. The predictions aren't psychic. They're the result of smart people paying very close attention to the direction the world was moving in and then exaggerating that direction for comedic effect. The exaggeration just happened to land on the truth more often than anyone expected. And that, to me, is actually more impressive than if the show were genuinely supernatural. Because predicting the future through magic requires no skill. But predicting the future through deep understanding of the present, through satire so sharp that it cuts into tomorrow, that requires brilliance. And the writer's room of The Simpsons was brilliant. But the conspiracy isn't about whether the predictions are real. The conspiracy is about why the show doesn't explain them. And I think the answer is simple but profound. Silence is their greatest asset. Every theory we've discussed tonight benefits from the show's silence. The Homer coma theory persists because the writers acknowledge it without debunking it. The who shot Burns mystery stays alive because the final shot of Maggie raises more questions than the official answer resolves. The family genius theory thrives because the evidence is scattered across decades of episodes and nobody has ever assembled it into a definitive statement. The Springfield location mystery endures because the show actively contradicts itself and seems to enjoy doing so. In every case, the show created something ambiguous. Notice that fans were building elaborate theories around that ambiguity and chose to protect the ambiguity rather than resolve it. That's not accidental. That's a strategy. And it's a strategy that has kept The Simpsons relevant, discussed, and analyzed long past the point where many shows would have been forgotten. Think about other long-running shows. How many of them generate this level of fan theorizing? How many of them have conspiracy theories that make international news? The Simpsons does, and it's not because the show is better written than everything else on television. It's because the show understands something that most entertainment properties don't. The audience's imagination is the single greatest storytelling tool in existence. If you give fans just enough information to build a theory and then you refuse to confirm or deny it, they will do your creative work for you. They will find connections you didn't intend. They will build narratives more elaborate than anything you could have written. And they will care about those narratives deeply because they created them. The Simpsons has been doing this for over 30 years, and they're still doing it. There was a moment in season 34 that I think perfectly encapsulates this approach. The episode, Lisa the Boy Scout, was a meta-comedy episode that played with the show's own history and reputation. It featured deliberately terrible deleted scenes that parodied various fan theories and criticisms. The coma theory was addressed and dismissed as a bad idea. The Dead Bart creepypasta, a famous internet urban legend about a lost episode where Bart dies, was also referenced and mocked. But here's the thing. By acknowledging these theories, even to make fun of them, the show drew attention to them. Millions of viewers who had never heard of the coma theory learned about it because the show mentioned it. Millions of people who had never read the Dead Bart creepypasta went and looked it up because the show referenced it. The show said, "These theories are silly," while simultaneously amplifying them to a massive audience. That's not debunking, that's marketing, and I mean that as a compliment. It's incredibly savvy. The writers understand that fan theories are a form of engagement, that arguments about whether Homer is in a coma are, in their own way, a form of love. People don't write 10,000-word Reddit posts about shows they don't care about. They do it because The Simpsons matters to them, because the show gave them something rich enough to analyze, interpret, and debate, and the show repays that investment by never shutting the conversation down. I want to linger on this idea for a moment because I think it connects to something bigger than just The Simpsons. We live in an era where every piece of entertainment is instantly dissected online. Every frame is analyzed. Every line of dialogue is screenshotted and debated. And most creators respond to this scrutiny in one of two ways. Either they explain everything, removing all ambiguity through interviews and social media posts and behind-the-scenes content, or they get defensive, telling fans that they're reading too much into things and that sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. The Simpsons does neither. They lean into the analysis. They feed it. They give fans just enough rope to build elaborate theories, and then they watch with what I can only imagine is genuine amusement as the internet goes to work. They don't explain because explanation would kill the magic. And they don't push back because pushing back would insult the fans who are doing the most to keep the show alive. It's a relationship built on mutual understanding. The fans know on some level that not every theory is true. They know that the coma theory is probably just a creative interpretation, not a hidden truth. They know that the Springfield Tesseract theory is a thought experiment, not canon. But they also know that the show respects them enough not to say so. And that respect, that willingness to let the audience be creative, is what keeps the conversation going. I think there's actually a beautiful parallel here to the very first theory we discussed tonight, the conversation between Homer and God. Homer asks the meaning of life. God begins to answer. The credits roll. We never hear what God said. The Simpsons as a show is Homer in that scene. The fans are asking again and again, what does it all mean? What are the hidden truths? What's really going on? And the show, like God, begins to answer. It drops hints. It acknowledges the questions. It leans forward as if it's about to reveal everything. And then the credits roll, and we're left with the silence. And the silence is where all the theories live. But let me expand on the writer's room for a bit, because I think understanding how The Simpsons is actually made helps explain why so many of these theories feel like they have weight to them. And it also introduces some behind-the-scenes mysteries that are just as interesting as the ones on screen. The Simpsons has one of the most unusual production processes in television. Because it's animated, each episode takes roughly 6 to 9 months to produce from script to screen. That means the writers are always working far ahead of what's currently airing. They're writing jokes about a world that hasn't happened yet, making references to trends that might not exist by the time the episode airs, and trying to stay relevant in a medium that requires them to predict, at least somewhat, what audiences will care about months from now. This lead time is, I think, one of the underappreciated reasons why the show seems to predict things. When you're forced to write about the near future as part of your production process, you naturally develop a habit of thinking about where things are heading. You start extrapolating. You start playing what-if games. And when you've been doing that for 35 years with a room full of brilliant people, some of your extrapolations are going to land. But the writer's room has its own mysteries too. And one of the biggest ones involves a man named John Swartzwelder. Swartzwelder wrote 59 episodes of The Simpsons, which is more than any other writer in the show's history. He is, by any measure, one of the most important creative forces behind the show. And yet, almost nobody knows what he looks like. He is legendarily private. He almost never gives interviews. There are very few photographs of him publicly available. For years, he was essentially a ghost. A name on a credits list who produced some of the funniest television ever written and then disappeared. The other writers speak about him with something approaching reverence. They describe him as a comedy genius whose first drafts were so good that they barely needed rewriting. They describe his writing process as almost supernatural in its efficiency. He would sit in a booth at a coffee shop, apparently the same booth every day, and write complete scripts that arrived at the table reads practically finished. When asked about the theories and conspiracies that fans have built around the show, the writers tend to deflect with humor. But there's an interesting pattern in how they deflect. They rarely say no. They rarely say, that's wrong. They say things like, that's a fun idea, or I wish we'd thought of that, or, that's not how we intended it, but it works. They create the impression that the fan theories might be better than the original intention. And I think for some of these writers, that's genuinely true. They're impressed by what the fans have built, and they don't want to tear it down. There's another behind-the-scenes element that feeds into the conspiracy culture around the show, and it has to do with the timeline. The Simpsons has one of the most contradictory, confusing, and actively hostile to logic internal timelines of any show in television history. And the contradictions aren't accidental. They're deliberate. And the show seems to revel in them. Here's what I mean. In early seasons, Homer and Marge's backstory is set in the 1970s. They meet in high school. They go to prom. The aesthetic is clearly late 70s. But as the show continued, the backstory kept getting updated. By the time that 90s show aired in season 19, Homer and Marge's young adult years had been moved to the 1990s. They're now part of the grunge era. Marge is dating a college professor. Homer starts a band. The entire timeline of their courtship has shifted forward by about 15 years. This creates massive contradictions with earlier episodes. If Homer was a teenager in the 90s, he can't have been at Woodstock. He can't have the memories he has from the 70s. His Vietnam-era experiences don't work. His entire backstory is different depending on which episode you watch. The standard explanation is what fans call a floating timeline. The characters don't age, so their backstories have to keep being updated to maintain the same age gap between their youth and the current year. It's a practical necessity. If Homer's always 39 and the show is set in the present day, his formative years have to keep moving forward. But the fan theory community has a different take. Some argue that these timeline shifts are evidence that the show's universe has been altered, possibly by time travel, possibly by the reality-warping nature of Springfield itself. If Grandpa Abe is a time traveler, as one theory suggests, his interference with history could create exactly these kinds of contradictions. If Springfield exists in a tesseract, time within it might not be linear at all, allowing for multiple contradictory backstories to coexist. And there's the theory that the timeline contradictions are themselves evidence of the coma. If everything after season 4 is happening in Homer's unconscious mind, then the timeline doesn't need to be consistent. Dreams don't follow logical rules. Dreams shuffle memories, compress time, and create impossible sequences. The shifting backstory could simply be Homer's dreaming brain trying to keep his imagined world current while working with outdated memories. The writers have acknowledged the timeline issue in interviews, usually with a shrug and a joke. Al Jean once said something to the effect of, "We try not to think about it too hard." But the fact that they keep updating the backstory, keep creating new contradictions, and keep refusing to establish a definitive canon suggests that the messiness is part of the appeal. A clean, logical timeline would be boring. A contradictory, impossible timeline is a playground for theorists. While we're talking about characters and their hidden depths, I want to circle back to something I mentioned briefly earlier and give it a bit more time, because there's a really interesting way to look at Sideshow Bob that doesn't get talked about enough. Sideshow Bob, or Robert Underdunk Terwilliger, is one of the show's most iconic recurring villains. He's a cultured, intelligent, Kelsey Grammer-voiced criminal who has spent the better part of 30 years trying to kill Bart Simpson. His schemes are elaborate, literary, and always ultimately unsuccessful. He's the Wile E. Coyote to Bart's Roadrunner if Wile E. Coyote quoted Gilbert and Sullivan. But there's a reading of Sideshow Bob's arc that suggests something more complicated than a simple villain. Because Bob wasn't always evil. He started as Krusty's sidekick, a talented performer who was treated badly by his employer. His turn to villainy came after he framed Krusty for robbery, and his subsequent crimes escalated from there. But in multiple episodes, Bob has shown genuine capacity for reform. He's had moments of real vulnerability. He's formed relationships. He's tried to build a normal life. And every single time, the universe, or more accurately, Bart, drags him back into villainy. The fan theory isn't so much a theory as it is an observation. Sideshow Bob is the only character on The Simpsons who is genuinely trying to change, and the show won't let him. Every other character is static. Homer is always Homer. Bart is always Bart. But Bob keeps trying to be different, and the narrative keeps punishing him for it. He's trapped in a cycle that the other characters can't even perceive, because they're not self-aware enough to notice it. There was actually an episode in season 27 called Treehouse of Horror 26 that included a segment where Bob finally kills Bart, and the aftermath is fascinating. Bob doesn't celebrate. He doesn't feel triumphant. He feels empty. Without Bart to chase, his life has no purpose. He's defined entirely by his obsession, and the removal of that obsession leaves him with nothing. It's played for comedy, of course, but the underlying idea is genuinely sad, and the show has never resolved it. Bob keeps coming back, keeps trying to kill Bart, keeps failing, and the cycle continues. The question of whether Bob can ever truly reform, whether the show would ever let him become something other than a villain, remains open, and the writers seem content to keep it that way. And since we're on the subject of characters trapped in cycles, I want to mention one more theory that connects to the Springfield economic mystery. This one is about Cletus Spuckler, the slack-jawed yokel. Cletus is one of Springfield's poorest residents. He lives in a ramshackle house with his wife Brandine and somewhere in the neighborhood of 44 children. 44. The show has given various numbers at various times, but the family is enormous. They live in apparent poverty. Cletus has no steady job. He's the stereotype of rural destitution. But a Reddit user named Grifter42 pointed out something interesting about a season 9 episode called The Joy of Sect. In that episode, Springfield is taken over by a cult called Movementarianism. The cult's leader swindles millions of dollars from the townspeople and then attempts to flee to the planet Blistonia, which is really just a private island. But his escape plan fails. The money is scattered. And who ends up with it? The theory suggests that Cletus recovered the cult's fortune. that somewhere in his ramshackle property, hidden among the rusted cars and chicken coops, is a massive stash of stolen cult money, and that this is how he supports 44 children on no visible income. He's not poor, he's secretly rich. He just lives the way he's always lived because, like Homer, he prefers his existing lifestyle to the complications that wealth would bring. It's a stretch, sure. The show never explicitly connects Cletus to the cult money, but it's exactly the kind of gap that The Simpsons leaves open for fans to fill. The question of how Cletus feeds 44 children has never been answered in the show. The cult money is never accounted for. The two loose ends exist in the same universe, and someone on the internet noticed they could be tied together. That's the magic of the Simpsons conspiracy ecosystem. Every unanswered question is a potential connection. Every loose end is a thread that someone somewhere will pull. And the show keeps generating new loose ends, new questions, new ambiguities, season after season, year after year. I've been thinking a lot while putting this together about why conspiracy theories work so well as a lens for understanding The Simpsons specifically. And I think it comes down to something fundamental about the show's DNA. The Simpsons was, from its earliest episodes, a show about things not being what they seem. Springfield looks like a normal town, but it's filled with corruption, absurdity, and hidden systems of power. Homer looks like a simple man, but he's more complicated than he appears. The nuclear power plant looks functional, but it's held together by incompetence and luck. The police department looks like it's protecting the town, but it's barely competent. The school looks like it's educating children, but it's underfunded and understaffed and run by a man who may or may not be an imposter. The entire show is built on the premise that the surface story is never the whole story, that there's always something underneath, something darker, funnier, sadder, or stranger than what you see on your first viewing. The show trained us from its very first episode to look deeper, to question what we're told, to find the joke behind the joke. Is it any wonder then that when fans do exactly that, they find conspiracies everywhere? The show taught them how to look, and then it gave them 35 years of material to look through. The conspiracies aren't a bug in the Simpsons ecosystem. They're a feature. They're what happens when a show that rewards close attention is given to an audience that pays close attention. The theories are inevitable, and the show knows it. That's why they never deny them, because denying them would be denying the very thing that makes the show what it is. It would be saying, stop looking deeper. And that's the one thing The Simpsons has never said. There's one more prediction I want to mention before we start wrapping up, because it's one that doesn't get talked about as much as the Trump or Disney ones, but I think it might be the most revealing example of how the show's predictions actually work. In season 6, the episode Lisa's Wedding shows a flash forward to the year 2010. In it, Lisa is getting married. The episode was written in 1995, so the writers were imagining what the world would look like 15 years in the future. And among the background details, there's a scene where a character makes a phone call on a device that looks remarkably like a modern smartphone. It's flat. It's handheld. It has a screen. In 1995, mobile phones were still the size of bricks. But here's what's interesting about this particular prediction. The writers didn't set out to predict the smartphone. They set out to imagine what communication technology might look like in 2010. They took the trajectory of existing technology, miniaturization, wireless communication, screen-based interfaces, and extrapolated forward. The smartphone wasn't a wild guess. It was a reasonable extension of trends that were already visible in 1995. And that's the story of almost every Simpsons prediction. Not psychic vision, just intelligent extrapolation by people who are paying attention. The Trump presidency was an extrapolation of celebrity culture and political trends. The Disney-Fox merger was an extrapolation of media consolidation. The smartwatch was an extrapolation of wearable technology concepts that already existed in research labs. The genius of the show isn't that it can see the future. It's that it can see the present more clearly than anyone else. And when you see the present clearly enough, the future starts to come into focus. I think about the writer's room sometimes, a room full of people who are, by all accounts, some of the sharpest minds in entertainment. And I wonder if they sit around watching the internet lose its mind over a new prediction and laugh. Not in a mean way, but in the way that someone laughs when a joke they told 15 years ago suddenly becomes relevant for reasons they could never have anticipated. The punchline landed. It just took a while. And actually, since we're talking about the writers and the intelligence behind the show, I want to spend some time on something that's not exactly a conspiracy theory, but is definitely a mystery that the show's own creators have never fully resolved. And that's the question of the Golden Age. If you spend any time in Simpsons fan communities, you'll encounter the Golden Age debate almost immediately. It's one of the most passionately argued topics in the entire fandom. When did The Simpsons peak? When did it start to decline? And most importantly, why? The general consensus, and I say general because there are people who will argue about this until the heat death of the universe, is that the Golden Age runs roughly from Season 3 through Season 8, with some people extending it to Season 9 or pulling it back to start at Season 2. These are the seasons that produced episodes like Last Exit to Springfield, Marge Versus, The Monorail, Homer at the Bat, Cape Fear, Who Shot Mr. Burns, You Only Move Twice, and dozens of others that are considered not just great Simpsons episodes, but some of the greatest episodes of television ever made. After the Golden Age, the show continued. It never stopped. But something changed. The writing became broader. The characters became more exaggerated. The emotional grounding that made the early seasons so beloved started to fade. Stories that once centered on real family dynamics started centering on wacky adventures. Homer, as we discussed earlier, went from a flawed but loving father to something closer to a cartoon character in the most literal sense. Now, the standard explanation for this shift is that key writers left. Conan O'Brien left after Season 4 to start his late-night career. Many other Golden Age writers moved on to other projects. Al Jean and Mike Rice, who ran the show in its early years, stepped away for a time. The show's creative DNA changed as new writers came in and brought different sensibilities. That's the practical explanation, and it's probably the correct one. But of course, fans have theories. The coma theory, which we discussed at length earlier tonight, is the most elaborate attempt to explain the shift. If Homer went into a coma in Season 4, then the Golden Age represents the last seasons of real Simpsons, and everything after is the dream. The decline in quality isn't a decline at all. It's a shift from reality to imagination, from grounded storytelling to the unconstrained fantasies of an unconscious mind. There's another theory that takes a more meta approach. It suggests that The Simpsons became aware of itself, that at some point around Season 8 or 9, the show became so famous, so culturally dominant, so aware of its own influence, that it could no longer be the scrappy, subversive comedy it started as. It became an institution, and institutions by their nature are conservative. They protect their legacy. They avoid risks. They play to their audience rather than challenging them. This theory doesn't require any in-universe explanation. It's a theory about the show as a creative product, not about the characters. But it's still a conspiracy of sorts because it implies that something was lost, not by accident, but by design. That the show chose safety over brilliance. That the people making it understood what was happening and accepted it because the alternative, taking risks and potentially failing, was worse for business. I don't know if that's true. I suspect the reality is more complicated and more human than any theory can capture. Shows change because people change. The people who made The Simpsons in 1993 were different from the people who made it in 2003, who were different from the people who made it in 2013. Each generation of writers brought their own strengths and their own limitations. The Golden Age wasn't a conspiracy. It was a constellation of talent that happened to align at the right time. And when that constellation shifted, the light changed. But the fact that fans frame it as a mystery, as something that needs to be explained or solved, tells you something about how deeply people feel about this show. The Golden Age isn't just a period of television history. It's a personal memory for millions of people. It's the show they grew up with, the show that shaped their sense of humor, the show that taught them what good writing looks like. And when that show changed, it felt like a loss. And losses demand explanations. There's another cultural phenomenon connected to The Simpsons that I want to talk about because it feeds directly into the conspiracy narrative. South Park, the other great animated satirical comedy, once aired an episode called Simpsons Already Did It. The premise was simple. Every time the South Park characters came up with a scheme or a joke, someone would point out that The Simpsons had already done something similar. The episode was a comedy, but it was also making a serious point. The Simpsons has been on so long and covered so much ground that it's genuinely difficult to do anything in animated comedy that the show hasn't already touched on. This idea has become a cultural meme in its own right. Simpsons did it is a phrase that gets thrown around whenever anything happens in real life that resembles a Simpsons plot. And it reinforces the prediction narrative in a way that's almost self-perpetuating. The more the show is credited with doing it first, the more people look for connections between the show and real life. The more they look, the more they find. The more they find, the more the legend grows. It's a feedback loop that the show benefits from enormously and one that they have never tried to break. And honestly, there's a case to be made that The Simpsons actually has done nearly everything. With over 800 episodes, the show has satirized virtually every aspect of American life. Politics, religion, education, healthcare, the military, the media, technology, sports, entertainment, family dynamics, workplace culture, small-town life, big city pretension, and dozens of other topics have all been thoroughly explored. The show has told stories about every kind of crisis, every kind of celebration, every kind of human emotion. When you've covered that much ground, the overlaps with reality aren't surprising. They're inevitable. But Simpsons predicted it is a better story than Simpsons covered so much that statistical overlap is guaranteed. Stories matter, narratives matter, and the narrative of The Simpsons as a prophetic show is just too good for anyone, including the show itself, to let go of. I want to take a slight detour here and talk about something that doesn't usually get framed as a conspiracy, but that I think qualifies perfectly for tonight's theme. And that's the impact The Simpsons has had on the English language itself. The show has genuinely, verifiably, measurably changed how English is spoken. And some of these changes have happened so gradually and so completely that people use Simpsons coined words and phrases without having any idea where they came from. Dough. Homer's signature exclamation of frustration. This word was added to the Oxford English Dictionary in 2001. That's not a fan wiki or an informal list. That's the Oxford English Dictionary, the most authoritative record of the English language. Homer Simpson's grunt of annoyance is now officially a word. Meh. While The Simpsons didn't technically invent this expression of indifference, its use in the episode Hungry, Hungry Homer is widely credited with popularizing it globally. Before The Simpsons, May was a niche expression. After The Simpsons, it became universal, embiggen and cromulent. These words were invented for the episode Lisa the Iconoclast, where they're presented as fake words that Springfield's residents use without question. A noble spirit embiggens the smallest man is Springfield's town motto, and when someone questions whether embiggens is a real word, another character responds, "I don't know why." It's a perfectly cromulent word. Both words have since entered actual dictionaries and are used in academic and scientific contexts. Embiggen, in particular, has been adopted by the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where it's used as Ms. Marvel's catchphrase. A word that was specifically created to be fake has become real through sheer cultural force. Sheen, cheese-eating surrender monkeys. Groundskeeper Willie's description of the French in the episode Round Springfield. This phrase was subsequently used in real political commentary and journalism, particularly during disagreements between the United States and France over the Iraq War. A Simpsons joke became a diplomatic insult. And then there are the catchphrases that have become so embedded in culture that they've almost lost their connection to the show. Worst episode ever from Comic Book Guy is used constantly online to express disappointment, often by people who have never watched a single episode. Eat My Shorts was on t-shirts and lunchboxes throughout the early 1990s. Don't have a cow, man was the defining phrase of Bartmania. Excellent, with the steepled fingers, is a universal gesture for villainy. Haha from Nelson Muntz is the internet's default expression of mockery. Linguistics researchers have actually studied this phenomenon. The Simpsons has been cited as one of the most significant sources of new words and phrases in modern English, rivaling Shakespeare and the King James Bible in terms of cultural language contribution. Now that comparison is often made with a wink, because obviously the Bible and Shakespeare have had more total impact on the language. But the point stands, in terms of late 20th and early 21st century English, The Simpsons is one of the most influential texts in existence. And here's where it connects to our theme tonight. This linguistic impact was never planned. The writers didn't sit down and say, let's invent words that will enter the dictionary. They just wrote funny dialogue. They created expressions that felt natural to their characters. And then the audience took those expressions and made them real. That's the same process that drives the conspiracy theories. The writers create something sometimes intentionally deep, sometimes just funny, and the audience takes it and builds something larger out of it. The theories, like the language, take on a life of their own, and the show lets it happen. There's one more topic I want to touch on before we start winding down, and it's something that happened fairly recently and created a minor controversy that actually illustrates the show's relationship with its own legacy perfectly. In 2024, during season 35, there was an episode that appeared to reference the running gag of Homer strangling Bart. You know the one, Bart does something annoying, Homer yells, "Why you little?" and grabs Bart by the throat. It's been a part of the show since the earliest episodes, hundreds of times, one of the most iconic recurring bits in all of television. The season 35 episode seemed to suggest that the show might be retiring the gag. It played it differently. It seemed more self-aware about it. And the internet, predictably, exploded. Articles were written about whether The Simpsons was finally getting rid of the strangling gag in response to changing cultural attitudes about depicting violence against children, even in a cartoon context. And then James L. Brooks, one of the show's executive producers and one of the most important figures in its creation, responded. And his response was basically, no. Don't think for a second we're changing anything. That response is so perfectly Simpsons. The show created a moment of ambiguity. The internet built a theory around it. And then one of the creators stepped in, not to over-explain or to apologize, but to flatly deny the theory in a way that was both definitive and slightly amused. Don't think for a second we're changing anything. It's the voice of a show that knows exactly what it is and has no intention of becoming something else. But even that response has become part of the fan theory ecosystem, because some fans took Brooks' statement not as a denial of change, but as a confirmation that the show is aware of the discourse and is choosing to lean into controversy rather than away from it. The show could have quietly stopped doing the gag. Instead, they drew attention to it, created a conversation, and then shut it down with a statement that itself became a conversation. Everything The Simpsons does, even its denials, generates more theories. I find this endlessly fascinating, and I think it speaks to something fundamental about how culture works in the internet age. Nothing is ever truly settled. No statement is ever the final word. Every answer generates new questions, and a show that has been on the air long enough to accumulate over 800 episodes of material, decades of interviews, thousands of hours of DVD commentary, and an infinite amount of fan analysis is essentially a perpetual motion machine of interpretation. It will never run out of theories because it will never run out of material to theorize about. The Simpsons is, in a very real sense, the first show that was built for the internet, even though it predates the internet as we know it. The density of its references, the depth of its characterization, the consistency of its internal contradictions, all of these things make it the perfect subject for the kind of collaborative analysis that the internet enables. Reddit threads about Simpsons theories get thousands of upvotes. YouTube videos about Simpsons Conspiracies get millions of views. The show has an entire second life online, running parallel to the actual show, where fans are constantly discovering, debating, and constructing new readings of old material. And that second life is, I would argue, just as important to the show's legacy as the show itself. The Simpsons didn't just entertain a generation. It taught a generation how to analyze entertainment. It taught people to look for subtext, to notice background details, to question narrative choices, and to build their own interpretations of the stories they consume. The fan theory culture that surrounds The Simpsons is a direct descendant of the show's own approach to storytelling, which has always rewarded careful viewers with hidden jokes, background gags, and layers of meaning that only reveal themselves on repeat viewings. The show created its own analysts, and those analysts in turn keep the show alive in ways that the creators could never have anticipated. There's one more area I want to explore before we begin wrapping up. And it has to do with the Treehouse of Horror episodes and their place in the conspiracy landscape. Because fans have spent years arguing about whether these Halloween specials are canon. And the answer, like everything else with this show, is more complicated than it should be. For those who might not be familiar, the Treehouse of Horror episodes are the Simpsons' annual Halloween specials. They've aired every year since season 2, and they typically consist of 3 short segments that are explicitly non-canonical. Characters die, the world ends, aliens invade, zombies rise. The rules of the Simpsons universe are suspended, and the writers get to do whatever they want without worrying about continuity. At least, that's the official position. The Treehouse episodes don't count. They're separate from the main show. What happens in them has no bearing on the regular episodes. But fans have noticed something interesting. Details from Treehouse of Horror episodes have a habit of bleeding into the main show. Kang and Kodos, the aliens who appear exclusively in Treehouse segments, have been referenced in regular episodes. Visual gags from Treehouse episodes have appeared in the background of non-Halloween shows. And some Treehouse segments have explored ideas like time travel and alternate dimensions that fan theories rely on as evidence for their arguments about the main show. The most significant example is Time and Punishment from Treehouse of Horror 5. As we discussed when we talked about Grandpa's time travel theory, this segment features Homer using a time toaster to travel to the past and accidentally altering the present. If this segment is canon, it means that the Simpsons universe has been subjected to timeline alterations. If it isn't canon, it's still a piece of the show's creative DNA that reveals what the writers think about when they think about time, causality, and the nature of their fictional world. The fan theory community is split on this. Some treat Treehouse episodes as completely separate, a sandbox that has no connection to the main show. Others argue that the Treehouse episodes are the show at its most honest, the moments when the writers drop the pretense of realism and show us what Springfield really is. A malleable, impossible, rule-free space where anything can happen and nothing is permanent. If you take the second position, then the Treehouse episodes become a goldmine for conspiracy theories. Homer has died in Treehouse episodes more times than anyone can count. The family has been transformed into vampires, zombies, and aliens. Springfield has been destroyed by comets, radiation, and dolphin uprisings. And in each case, the reset button is hit and life goes on. But what if the reset button isn't resetting things to the way they were? What if each Treehouse of Horror introduces tiny changes to the main timeline that accumulate over years? What if the reason the show feels different in later seasons isn't because the writing changed, but because the universe itself has been altered by decades of Halloween specials? It's a wild idea, and I want to be clear that I'm presenting it as a fun thought experiment, not as something I think the writers intended. But it's the kind of theory that The Simpsons makes possible. The show has produced so much material across so many formats over so many years that the boundaries between canon and non-canon have become genuinely blurry. And in that blur, theories thrive. Speaking of blurry boundaries, there's a fascinating real-world element to the Springfield mystery that I haven't mentioned yet. And it has to do with the actual physical, real-world Springfields that exist across America and how they've responded to the show. There are over 30 Springfields in the United States. Springfield, Illinois, Springfield, Massachusetts, Springfield, Missouri, Springfield, Ohio, Springfield, Oregon, and many, many more. When Matt Groening confirmed in 2012 that the show's Springfield was inspired by Springfield, Oregon, you might think that would have settled the debate. But it didn't, because several other Springfields had already staked their claim. Springfield, Oregon embraced the connection enthusiastically. They have Simpsons murals, a Simpsons trail, and various businesses that reference the show. But Springfield, Massachusetts also has a strong claim, particularly because the Basketball Hall of Fame is there and the show features a lot of basketball references. Springfield, Illinois has the state capital connection, which fits with episodes involving government and politics. And here's the thing that makes this a conspiracy of sorts. None of these towns have been officially endorsed or rejected by the show. Groening said the name was inspired by Springfield, Oregon, but he also said the location was intentionally ambiguous. The show has never partnered with a specific Springfield. They've never said this is the real one. They've let every Springfield claim them. And in doing so, they've created a situation where the fictional town is simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. It belongs to everyone and no one. I think that's a perfect metaphor for the show itself. The Simpsons belongs to everyone who watches it. The theories belong to everyone who builds them. The meaning is everywhere and nowhere, simultaneously clear and impossible to pin down. Now, there's one more aspect of the show's relationship with fan theories that I think is worth discussing in some detail, and it has to do with how the show handles death. The Simpsons has a very strange and specific relationship with death. On one hand, characters die all the time. Hans Moleman, as we discussed, is killed in virtually every episode he appears in. Background characters are dispatched with casual frequency. Violence is constant and rarely has lasting consequences. On the other hand, when the show kills a character permanently, it treats it with surprising weight. Maud Flanders' death, despite the behind-the-scenes contract dispute that caused it, was handled with genuine emotional seriousness. Ned's grief lasted for multiple seasons. The episode where he finally accepts her death is one of the most genuinely moving episodes the show has ever produced. Bleeding Gums Murphy, Lisa's saxophone mentor, dies in season 6, and his death is treated as a formative trauma in Lisa's life. Mona Simpson, Homer's mother, dies in season 19, and the final scene of that episode, Homer sitting alone on the hood of his car watching the stars, is widely considered one of the most beautiful and emotionally devastating moments in the show's history. Even Edna Krabappel's retirement from the show, necessitated by the passing of voice actress Marcia Wallace in 2013, was handled with extraordinary care. The show didn't kill Edna on screen. They simply acknowledged her absence, retired the character, and included a chalkboard tribute from Bart that read, "We'll really miss you, Mrs. K." These moments of genuine emotion sit alongside the casual cartoon violence of Hans Moleman and Itchy and Scratchy, and that juxtaposition creates an interesting theoretical space. Because if death can be both meaningless and deeply significant within the same show, then the rules of the universe are, by definition, inconsistent. And inconsistency, as we've established, is where fan theories are born. The theory that Hans Moleman is multiple mole people is, at its core, an attempt to reconcile the show's inconsistent treatment of death. If Moleman's deaths are real, then he can't come back, unless there are more of him. The theory exists because the show's internal logic demands an explanation that the show refuses to provide. Similarly, the coma theory is, in part, an attempt to explain why some deaths feel permanent and others don't. If Homer is dreaming, then he can control which characters are important enough to stay dead, and which ones his brain simply regenerates because it needs them for the next dream. Bleeding Gums, Murphy stays dead because Homer's subconscious understands that Lisa needs that grief. Hans Moleman comes back because Homer barely registers his existence as a real person. These readings are speculative. They're fan constructions, but they emerge from genuine contradictions in the show that the writers have never resolved. And I think the writers are aware that these contradictions serve a purpose. They make the show endlessly analyzable. They give fans something to puzzle over. They keep the conversation going. Let me talk about one more thing that connects all of these theories in a way I find genuinely interesting, and that's the question of self-awareness. Across many of these theories, there's a common thread, the idea that someone in the Simpsons universe knows something that the others don't. Homer might know he's a cartoon if God told him. Maggie might know things that her baby body can't express. Moe might know it's Bart and play along. Bart might know about the stonecutters. Grandpa might have memories from altered timelines. Krusty might know his show isn't for kids. This pattern isn't accidental. The Simpsons is a self-aware show. It breaks the fourth wall regularly. Characters address the camera. The show references its own history, its own ratings, its own cultural impact. Homer has looked directly at the audience. Bart has written messages on the chalkboard that comment on real-world events. The show is constantly acknowledging that it is a show. And when a show is self-aware, its characters inherit some of that awareness, at least in the eyes of the audience. We project the show's meta-consciousness onto the characters, and suddenly Homer's recklessness looks like the behavior of someone who knows nothing matters. Bart's immunity from consequences looks like protection from a higher power. Springfield's impossible geography looks like a world that knows it's fictional and doesn't bother pretending otherwise. The fan theories in this light aren't just creative interpretations of plot points. They're responses to the show's own self-awareness. The show winks at us, and we wink back. And in that exchange, the theories are born. They're a conversation between a show that knows what it is and an audience that knows what it's watching. Neither side fully commits to saying what they mean, but both sides understand. That, I think, is the deepest conspiracy of all. Not any specific theory about Homer or Maggie or Springfield, but the conspiracy of mutual understanding between the show and its audience. The unspoken agreement that some questions are better left unanswered, that some mysteries are better left unsolved, that the gap between what's said and what's meant is where the magic lives. The Simpsons has maintained that gap for 35 years. And in that gap, millions of people have built theories, argued interpretations, shared discoveries, and connected with each other over a shared love of a show that refuses to tell them everything. The show gave them the gift of ambiguity, and they've spent decades unwrapping it. And you know what? I don't think they'll ever finish. Because the show keeps going. New episodes air every season. New details are added. New contradictions emerge. New theories are born. The conversation never ends because the show never ends. And even when it does eventually end, whenever that might be, the theories will continue. Because 800 episodes is an infinite well of material. People will be finding new connections, new patterns, new hidden meanings in this show for as long as people are watching television. There's something comforting about that, isn't there? In a world where everything changes and nothing lasts, The Simpsons is always there. Always generating new theories. Always refusing to give definitive answers. Always inviting you to look a little closer, think a little deeper, and find your own meaning in the chaos. I mentioned earlier tonight that the real conspiracy is the show's use of ambiguity as a survival strategy. But I want to revise that slightly, because I don't think ambiguity is just a strategy. I think it's a philosophy. The Simpsons believes fundamentally that the audience's imagination is more valuable than the writer's explanations. That the story you build in your head after watching an episode is just as real as the story on the screen. That art isn't finished when the creator is done with it. It's finished when the audience decides what it means. And the audience, gloriously, has never decided. They keep arguing. They keep theorizing. They keep finding new things in old episodes and building new theories out of ancient details. And The Simpsons, from its perch at the top of the longest-running scripted primetime show in American history, watches all of it happen and says nothing. Except sometimes, very occasionally when the mood strikes them, they'll slip a little detail into a new episode. A background gag, a throwaway line, a wink at a theory that's been circulating online. Just enough to keep the theorists going. Just enough to say, we see you, we know what you're doing, and we love it. And then the credits roll, and the silence returns, and the theories keep growing. Now, I realize we've been going for quite a while, and if you're still with me, first of all, thank you. This has been a long one, but before I let you drift off properly, I want to take a few minutes to just sit with all of this and think about what it means. Not the individual theories, not the specific evidence for or against any particular conspiracy, but the bigger picture. Why do we do this? Why do we spend hours building elaborate explanations for things that were probably just jokes? Why do fan theories matter? I think the answer is simpler than people usually make it. We do it because we love the show. And when you love something, you want to understand it completely. You want to know every detail, every hidden layer, every secret corner. You want to feel like you know it better than anyone else. And The Simpsons, with its incredible depth and its refusal to spell everything out, is the perfect object for that kind of love. It rewards obsession. It rewards attention. It rewards the kind of person who watches an episode 14 times and notices a background detail that changes the meaning of the whole thing. Fan theories are, at their core, acts of devotion. They're proof that someone cared enough about a piece of entertainment to spend hours thinking about it, researching it, and writing about it. The person who posted the Homer coma theory on Reddit wasn't wasting their time. They were engaged in a deeply creative act, building a narrative structure that explained and enriched something they loved. That's not different from what the writers do. It's the same impulse, the same love of story, the same desire to make things make sense. And I think The Simpsons understands this. I think the writers look at the fan theory community and see themselves reflected back. Because the writers are also people who obsess over details, who care about internal consistency even when they're deliberately violating it, who hide jokes in the background because it brings them joy to know that someone somewhere will eventually find them. The relationship between the show and its theorists isn't adversarial, it's collaborative. Both sides are playing the same game. They just have different pieces of the puzzle. There's a moment in the show that I keep coming back to when I think about all of this. It's from the very first Treehouse of Horror, way back in season 2. The family is sitting around telling scary stories. And before they begin, there's a brief disclaimer. Marge comes on screen and warns parents that the episode might be too intense for young viewers. She suggests changing the channel. It's a joke, obviously. Nobody is actually going to change the channel. But there's something warm about it. Something that says, we know who's watching, we know you're here, and we want you to have a good time. That warmth has been a constant throughout the show's run. For all its satire, for all its cynicism, for all its willingness to make fun of everything and everyone, The Simpsons has always had a fundamental warmth at its center. It cares about its characters. It cares about its audience. And it cares about the space between them, the space where theories and interpretations and personal connections live. I think that's why the show has lasted so long. Not because of any individual episode or any particular era of writing, but because of that warmth, because of the feeling that when you watch The Simpsons, you're part of something. A community of people who get the jokes, who notice the details, who care about the characters, and who are willing to spend their time and energy building elaborate theories about a cartoon family from a town that doesn't exist. Let me come back to where we started tonight. We opened this conversation by talking about conspiracies that the show never bothered to deny. And over the course of the last few hours, we've covered a lot of ground. The Homer coma theory, what God told Homer about the meaning of life, who really shot Mr. Burns, and whether the official answer is the whole truth. Maggie Simpson and her unsettling competence, the family genius conspiracy, Moe's secret knowledge of Bart's prank calls, the many lives and deaths of Hans Moleman and his possible underground civilization, Maud Flanders and the question of whether she was the devoted wife she appeared to be, Homer's impossible finances and the 3 separate explanations that might solve them, the Springfield Tesseract theory and the town that exists everywhere and nowhere, Grandpa Abe and his suspiciously specific knowledge of time travel, the Krusty the Clown show and its adult audience, Bart's potential future as the creator of a show about his own family, Lyle Landley and the monorail that was designed to kill, Bart's hidden stonecutter membership, and the predictions, the famous, uncanny, statistically explicable but emotionally undeniable predictions. Every single one of these theories shares the same fundamental quality. They're supported by evidence from the show. They're consistent with the characters and the world as we know them. And they've never been denied by the people who make the show. Some have been acknowledged with a wink. Some have been parodied without being debunked. Some have simply been ignored, left to grow in the silence like mushrooms in a dark room. But none of them have been killed. None of them have been stamped out with a definitive, "No, that's wrong. Here's the real answer." And that silence, that generous, intelligent, deeply intentional silence, is the thread that connects them all. The Simpsons doesn't deny these theories because the theories are part of the show. They're the audience's contribution to a 35-year conversation. They're the stories we tell about the stories we love. And the show respects them enough to let them exist on their own terms, without interference, without correction, without the kind of well-meaning explanation that would shrink them back down to their component parts. I think that's beautiful. I think there's something genuinely beautiful about a television show that trusts its audience enough to let them build their own meanings. That's rare. In an era of social media where every creator is a click away from explaining their intentions, where every mystery can be resolved with a tweet, The Simpsons still guards its ambiguities, still leaves space for wonder, still believes that the question is more interesting than the answer. And maybe that's the meaning of life, at least in the Simpsons universe. Not a specific answer, not a secret that God whispered to Homer in a dream, but the act of asking itself, the curiosity, the desire to understand, the willingness to look at something familiar and see something new. Homer asked God for the meaning of life, and God started to answer, and the credits rolled. And we've been filling in that silence ever since, with theories, with arguments, with jokes, with love. 35 years of filling in the blanks, and the blanks just keep getting richer. All right, that feels like a good place to leave things for tonight. We've been going for a while, and if you've made it this far, you're either very interested or very asleep. Both of those are perfectly fine outcomes for a video like this. These are just theories, of course. Fun ways to look at a show that so many of us grew up with and still care about deeply. Some of them might have a grain of truth in them. Some of them are probably just happy accidents that fans have turned into something more elaborate than the writers ever intended. And some of them might be exactly what the writers intended, planted decades ago and still waiting to be fully understood. We'll probably never know for sure. And honestly, I think that's the way it should be. The mystery is the point. The conversation is the point. The fact that 35 years into a show about a yellow family in a fictional town, we're still finding new things to talk about, new details to notice, new connections to make, that's the point. If you enjoyed this, there's going to be more coming. There are so many topics I didn't have time to get to tonight. The Ministry of Magic has nothing on the internal politics of Springfield. The creatures of the Simpsons universe could fill a whole video by themselves. And there are entire categories of theories we didn't even touch. Theories about the Treehouse of Horror timeline, about the nature of the couch gag, about what happens in the years between flash-forward episodes. There's always more with The Simpsons. Always. But for now, let's call it a night. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope some of these theories gave you something new to think about, and I hope the ones that didn't at least helped you relax on your way to sleep. Take care of yourself, get some good rest. And if you dream about Springfield tonight, well, who knows? Maybe Homer is dreaming about you right now too. Sweet dreams. Good night. Actually, before we close out completely, I realized there are a few more things I want to talk about. A few more theories that are too good to leave out, and some deeper dives into ideas we touched on earlier that I think deserve more time. So consider this the bonus round, if you will. A few more stories for the road before we say goodnight. Let's talk about something that ties into the Homer coma theory in a way that I don't think gets discussed enough. And that's the changing nature of Homer and Marge's relationship across the series. In the early seasons, Homer and Marge's marriage is the emotional backbone of the show. It's complicated, messy, and real. There are episodes about infidelity or the temptation of it. There are episodes about financial stress. There are episodes about the deep, quiet resentment that can build in a marriage when one person feels like they're carrying more than their share of the weight. Marge gets frustrated with Homer. Homer disappoints Marge. They fight. They reconcile. It feels genuine. But in later seasons, the dynamic shifts. Homer does increasingly outrageous things. Things that, in the real world, would end a marriage instantly. He forgets anniversaries. He spends the family savings. He causes explosions. He's sent to prison. He's accidentally married to another woman in Vegas. And through all of it, Marge stays. She's always there at the end of the episode. She always forgives him. The marriage, no matter how severely it's tested, always returns to its baseline. Now, the surface explanation is that this is a sitcom, and sitcoms need a stable status quo. You can't have Homer and Marge actually divorce because then the show changes fundamentally, and you lose the family dynamic that the whole series is built on. But if you're thinking about this through the lens of the coma theory, there's a different explanation. If everything after season 4 is Homer's dream, then Marge's infinite forgiveness isn't a sitcom convention. It's a fantasy. Homer, lying in a hospital bed, is dreaming of a wife who will never leave him no matter what he does. Because the thing Homer fears most, the thing that haunts him in those early, grounded, real-world episodes, is losing Marge. He knows he's not good enough for her. He knows she could do better. He knows on some level that he's one bad decision away from losing everything. So in his dream, he tests that boundary over and over. He pushes it to the absolute limit. He does things that no reasonable wife would tolerate, and Marge forgives him every time, because that's what Homer needs. Not a realistic marriage, but the assurance that he can never screw up badly enough to be truly alone. If that reading doesn't break your heart just a little, I don't know what will. because it transforms one of the show's most criticized aspects, the consequence-free nature of later Homer, into something deeply sad. He's not reckless because he doesn't care. He's reckless because he's testing in his unconscious mind the limits of love. And in his dream, love has no limits, because in his dream, it has to. There's a companion theory that works alongside this one, and it's about Homer's relationship with his kids. Because in the later seasons, there's been a notable shift in how Homer interacts with Bart and Lisa. In the early episodes, Homer is an imperfect but present father. He shows up to Lisa's saxophone recitals. He tries in his clumsy way to understand her. He puts Bart to bed. He has quiet moments of genuine tenderness with his children that ground the comedy in real emotion. In later seasons, Homer can barely remember he has a daughter named Maggie. His parenting becomes almost entirely absent. He's physically there, but emotionally checked out. And while this is usually played for comedy, Homer forgetting Maggie's name or not knowing which grade Bart is in, there's a sadness underneath it if you're reading the show through the coma lens. Because if Homer is dreaming, then his children are frozen at the ages he last saw them. Bart is always 10. Lisa is always 8. Maggie is always 1. And Homer, in his unconscious state, can't truly parent them. He can't watch them grow. He can't be there for their milestones. All he can do is replay scenarios with versions of his children that never change, never age, never become the adults they were supposed to be. His increasing detachment from them in later seasons might be his dreaming brain struggling with the knowledge buried deep that these aren't his real children. They're echoes, memories, frozen in time. I'm going to stop myself here because I can feel this one getting genuinely sad, and this is supposed to be a relaxing sleep video. So let's lighten things up a bit and talk about another conspiracy that's more fun than heartbreaking. This one is about Smithers. Waylon Smithers Jr., Mr. Burns' loyal assistant, right-hand man, and long-suffering confidant. For the first decade or so of the show, Smithers' sexuality was treated as an open secret. He was clearly in love with Burns. He had dreams about Burns flying through his bedroom window. He collected Malibu Stacy dolls. Every character in Springfield seemed to know, and Smithers himself seemed to know that they knew, but nobody ever said it directly. The conspiracy, or rather the behind-the-scenes story that has slowly become public over the years, is that the writers always intended for Smithers to be openly gay. But Fox, the network, wouldn't allow it in the early seasons. The 1990s were a very different time for LGBTQ representation on television. Having an openly gay character on a primetime animated show, especially one watched by millions of children, was considered too controversial. So the writers coded Smithers as gay through implication, subtext, and jokes that adults would understand, but that maintained plausible deniability. This is one of those cases where the conspiracy is actually true, and the writers have confirmed it. Al Jean and other producers have spoken about the network restrictions they faced. Smithers was eventually allowed to come out in season 27 in the episode The Burns Cage, and his coming out was treated as both a narrative progression and a decades-late acknowledgement of what everyone already knew. But what makes this relevant to our conspiracy theme tonight is how the show handled the decades of ambiguity. They never denied that Smithers was gay, but they also never confirmed it for over 20 seasons. When asked directly, writers would give ambiguous answers. They'd say things like Smithers is burnsexual or joke about his devotion without putting a label on it. They maintained the ambiguity not because they wanted to, but because they had to. And in the process, they turned Smithers' sexuality into one of the show's longest-running open secrets. It's a reminder that not all of the show's ambiguities are creative choices. Some of them are the result of external pressures, network restrictions, advertiser concerns, and the cultural climate of the time. The show couldn't always say what it wanted to say directly, so it said it sideways, through subtext, through implication, through the same kind of deliberate ambiguity that we've been talking about all night. And fans once again filled in the blanks. Smithers' sexuality was discussed in fan communities for years before the show confirmed it. People wrote analysis posts. They compiled evidence. They built arguments. And when the confirmation finally came, it felt less like a revelation and more like an overdue acknowledgement of something that had been obvious for decades. While we're on the subject of the show's relationship with its network, there's another interesting piece of behind-the-scenes drama that connects to the conspiracy culture around The Simpsons. and that's the recurring threat of cancellation. The Simpsons has faced cancellation threats multiple times over its run. The most serious one came in 2011 when Fox reportedly threatened to cancel the show unless the production costs were cut significantly. Some reports said by as much as 45%. The voice cast, who by that point were earning substantial salaries, would have had to take massive pay cuts. For a brief period, it looked like the show might actually end. But it didn't. The cast renegotiated. The show continued, and the whole episode was mostly forgotten by the public. But within the fan theory community, the cancellation threat raised an interesting question. What if The Simpsons had been canceled? What would the final episode look like? There are dozens of fan theories about how the show should end. Some of them are poignant, some are clever, some are dark, and some connect directly to the theories we've discussed tonight. One popular ending theory is that the show should close with the Homer coma reveal. The final episode would show Homer in a hospital bed, brain activity fading, and the camera would pull back to reveal that everything we've watched for 30 plus years was his dream. The very last scene would be his family, aged up to their real-life equivalent ages, gathered around his bed. Marge, gray-haired and tired, but still there. Bart in his 30s. Lisa in her late 20s. Maggie, a young woman, speaking for the first time. And they'd say goodbye. Another theory suggests the show should end where it began. The final scene would be a recreation of the first scene of the first episode with the family gathering around the television. The camera would pull back. The screen would turn off, and we'd be left with silence. A third theory, and this is my favorite, connects to the Bart as groaning theory. The show ends with an adult Bart sitting at a drawing table, sketching the characters from his childhood. He puts down the pen. He looks at what he's drawn. A family of yellow characters. A father, a mother, 2 sisters, a baby. He smiles, and we realize that the show we've been watching was always Bart's creation. His tribute to the family he grew up with. His way of immortalizing the people he loves in a form that will never age, never change, and never end. I think that last one is the most beautiful possible ending for a show that has meant so much to so many people. And I think the writers know about it. They know about all of these endings. They've read the theories. They've seen the posts. And when the day finally comes, whenever that might be decades from now at this rate, they'll have to choose. They'll have to decide how the story ends. And whatever they choose, there will be millions of people who had their own idea of how it should have gone. That's the final conspiracy, the ending that nobody knows, the last silence that the show will leave us with. And I suspect, knowing The Simpsons, that even the ending won't be definitive. Even the final episode will leave a loose thread, a question mark, a small ambiguity that fans can pick at forever. Because that's what the show does. It doesn't give you closure, it gives you something to talk about. And we will talk about it. For decades after the show ends, people will still be debating what the final episode meant. They'll still be finding new details in old episodes. They'll still be building theories and sharing them online and arguing about them with strangers who are really just friends they haven't met yet. Because that's what The Simpsons has given us. Not just a show, a community, a shared language, a common reference point. A 35-year conversation that shows no signs of ending, even when the show itself eventually will. There's one more thing I want to say before I let you go, and it's about the nature of these theories themselves. We've spent hours tonight treating them as mysteries to be analyzed, as puzzles to be solved, as evidence to be weighed. And that's fun. It's genuinely fun. But I want to make sure we don't lose sight of something important. These theories are also, all of them, acts of imagination. They're creative works. The person who wrote the Homer coma theory created a narrative. The person who proposed the Mo prank call theory told a story about loneliness and love. The person who imagined Hans Moleman as part of an underground civilization built a world. These aren't just analytical exercises, and they're creative ones. They're proof that the line between consuming art and creating art is thinner than we usually think. Every theory we discussed tonight started with someone watching The Simpsons and thinking, what if? And that what if is the same impulse that drove Matt Groening to create the show in the first place. What if there was a family named Simpson? What if they lived in a town called Springfield? What if the father was lovable but deeply flawed? What if the town was a mirror of everything ridiculous and wonderful about America? The fans who build theories are doing the same thing. They're extending the story. They're exploring the world. They're asking questions that the show left open and imagining answers that the show never provided. And in doing so, they're participating in the creative process. They're co-authors of the Simpsons experience. And the show, by never denying their contributions, has essentially welcomed them as collaborators. I think that's the most generous thing a piece of art can do. Not just tell a story, but leave space for the audience to tell their own stories within it. The Simpsons does this better than almost anything I can think of. And that's why, even after 35 years, even after 800 episodes, even after every conceivable topic has been covered and every possible joke has been made, people are still watching, still thinking, still theorizing, still falling asleep to videos like this one where someone talks about all the things the show never bothered to deny. And on that note, I think we really are done for tonight. Thank you genuinely for sticking around this long. Whether you heard every word or drifted off somewhere around the Molman theory, I appreciate you being here. Until next time, take care, get some rest, and remember, in the words of a show that has been saying things for 35 years without ever quite saying what it means, don't forget, you're here forever. Good night, everyone. Sweet dreams. Actually, you know what? I keep saying we're done and then coming back with more. And I think that's kind of appropriate for a video about The Simpsons because the show itself does exactly the same thing. It never quite ends. Every time you think it's wrapping up, there's one more gag, one more callback, one more little moment that makes you glad you stuck around. So in that spirit, let me share a few more things that have been rattling around in my head tonight. Consider these the post-credit scenes of our conversation. The first thing I want to come back to is something about the relationship between Bart and Lisa that I think connects to several of the theories we discussed, but that I didn't give enough time to earlier. Because there's a theory about Bart and Lisa that I find genuinely moving, and it has to do with the way they protect each other. On the surface, Bart and Lisa fight constantly. They're siblings. They annoy each other. Bart pulls pranks on Lisa. Lisa tattles on Bart. They bicker, argue, and compete for their parents' attention. It's standard sibling stuff, exaggerated for comedy. But if you look beneath the surface, there's a pattern. Whenever one of them is in real trouble, not sitcom trouble, but genuine emotional or physical danger, the other one shows up. Every time, without fail, when Lisa is being bullied, Bart steps in. When Bart is in danger, Lisa figures out how to save him. When Lisa feels alone and misunderstood, Bart is the one who finds a way to make her feel seen, even if he'd never admit it out loud. When Bart is failing in school or in trouble with the law, Lisa is the one who advocates for him, who argues that he's more than his worst behavior, who sees the intelligence and creativity that he hides from the rest of the world. The theory, which doesn't really have a single origin but has been expressed in various forms across fan communities for years, is that Bart and Lisa have an unspoken pact. They'll fight in public. They'll maintain their roles as antagonistic siblings. But when it matters, they're each other's first line of defense. It's an alliance that neither of them acknowledges, but both of them honor absolutely. And what makes this theory hit different in the context of the family genius conspiracy is the idea that they both know. They both know that Bart is smart. They both know that Lisa is lonely. They both know that the roles they play at school and at home don't represent who they really are. And they protect each other's secret selves because they're the only two people in the family who can see each other clearly. Homer can't see it because Homer is Homer. Marge can't see it because Marge needs to believe in the version of her children that makes sense to her. Maggie might see it, but she can't communicate it. Bart and Lisa are the only two members of the family who are both intelligent enough to perceive the other's complexity and emotionally mature enough to respect it. I think that's why so many fans find the Bart and Lisa episodes to be the emotional high points of the series. Lisa on ice, where they're forced to compete against each other in hockey and ultimately choose their bond over the game. Bart versus Thanksgiving, where Bart destroys Lisa's centerpiece and then spends the whole episode coming to terms with his guilt. Brother from the Same Planet, where their parallel stories of seeking surrogate siblings ultimately remind them that the real sibling relationship is irreplaceable. These episodes work because they tap into something real, the messy, complicated, fiercely loyal love between siblings who would never in a million years say, "I love you," but who would walk through fire for each other without hesitation. The theory doesn't add anything to that. It just names it. It just says, hey, this pattern exists and it's beautiful, and the show has never denied it because it doesn't need to. There's another small observation that I want to share, and this one is about the couch gag. The couch gag, for those who might not know, is the short sequence at the beginning of each episode where the Simpson family runs to their couch to watch television. Every episode has a different version of it. Sometimes the couch is normal. Sometimes it transforms. Sometimes the family is altered. Sometimes the entire sequence is replaced by an elaborate animated short by a guest animator. The couch gag is one of the most consistent elements of the show. It's been there since the beginning. In over 800 episodes, the variations have become increasingly creative, strange, and meta. There have been couch gags that take place in different animation styles, different countries, different time periods, and different realities. Some of them are funny, some are beautiful, some are genuinely unsettling. And there's a theory that the couch gag isn't just an opening sequence. It's a window into alternate realities. The idea is that each couch gag shows a different version of the Simpson family, a different Springfield, a different timeline. The family we see in the episode proper is just one of many, and the couch gag gives us a glimpse of the others. The version of the Simpsons who live in a Banksy painting, the version who exist in a pixel art video game, the version who are Rick and Morty characters. Each couch gag is a portal to a parallel universe where the Simpsons exist in a different form. It's a playful theory, and I don't think it's meant to be taken too seriously. But it does connect to the Tesseract theory in an interesting way. If Springfield exists outside of normal space and time, then the couch gag might be a visual representation of that instability. Every time the family sits down on the couch, the fabric of their reality shifts slightly. Sometimes the shift is minor, sometimes it's dramatic, but the family always ends up on the couch watching television together. The constant in every variation is the family unit. The variable is everything else. I find that oddly reassuring. No matter how strange the couch gag gets, no matter how warped or surreal or meta the opening becomes, the family is always there, sitting together, watching TV, being themselves. It's a small anchor of normalcy in a show that regularly defies every other form of normalcy. And I think it matters more than we usually give it credit for. Let me share one final thought, and then I promise, genuinely promise, that we're done. There's been a debate in the fan community for years about whether The Simpsons should end. The people who argue for ending it usually cite the decline in quality from the golden age. They say the show has been running on fumes for decades. They say it's a shadow of what it used to be. They say it should have ended at season 8 or season 10 or season 12 or wherever their personal cutoff is. And they make fair points. The later seasons are different. They are, by most critical metrics, not as consistently brilliant as the early years. But the people who argue against ending the show make a different case. They say that The Simpsons isn't just a television show. It's a living cultural document. It's a record of American life that has been updating in real time for over 35 years. No other piece of art has done what The Simpsons has done, tracking the evolution of a society across 3.5 decades of uninterrupted storytelling. The early seasons captured the anxieties of the late 1980s and early 1990s. The middle seasons captured the tech boom, the war on terror, and the rise of social media. The recent seasons capture the current moment with all its complexity and chaos. If the show had ended at season 8, we wouldn't have the predictions. We wouldn't have the meta episodes that acknowledged and played with fan theories. We wouldn't have the Smithers coming out episode. We wouldn't have the tribute to Edna Krabappel. We wouldn't have the ongoing, evolving conversation between the show and its audience that has produced every theory we discussed tonight. The show's longevity is itself the source of its conspiracies. You can't have 35 years of fan theories about a show that lasted 3 seasons. The length of the run is what makes the analysis possible. The depth of the archive is what makes the theories compelling. And the sheer volume of material is what makes the statistical overlaps with reality, the so-called predictions, inevitable. So maybe the show shouldn't end. Maybe the whole point is that it keeps going, that it keeps generating material, that it keeps feeding the conversation, that it keeps leaving loose ends for fans to pull. that it keeps creating the ambiguities that make nights like tonight possible. Or maybe it should end. Maybe there's an ending out there that would be so perfect, so satisfying, so worthy of the show's legacy that it would justify 35 years of buildup. Maybe the Homer coma theory has the right idea, and the show should close with the most emotionally devastating revelation in television history. Maybe the Barda's groaning theory should guide the ending, and the show should close with a moment of creative hope. Maybe the show should end the way Homer the Heretic almost did, with a conversation between Homer and God. Except this time we hear the answer, I don't know. Nobody knows. And that uncertainty, that not knowing, is the final, most enduring conspiracy of The Simpsons. The ending is the theory we're all waiting for. The one that hasn't been written yet. The one that every fan has a version of in their head. And until the show finally ends, every version is equally valid. Which means that right now, tonight, while the show is still on the air, the conspiracy is still alive. The theories are still growing. The conversation is still happening. And the silence from the writers, the glorious, infuriating, generous silence, is still the greatest storytelling tool in television. All right, now we're really done. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about a 35-year-old cartoon enough to spend hours hearing someone talk about its secrets. Get some sleep. The theories will still be here in the morning. They always are. Good night. Okay, one genuinely final thing. I wasn't going to mention this because it's more of a personal observation than a conspiracy theory, but I think it fits perfectly with everything else we've talked about tonight. And it has to do with why sleep videos about The Simpsons work so well. Think about it for a second. There are thousands of topics you could fall asleep to. True crime, history, nature documentaries, space facts, and all of those are popular in the sleep video space. But The Simpsons keeps coming up. People want to fall asleep hearing about this specific show, and I think there's a reason for that beyond simple nostalgia. The Simpsons is comfort food for the brain. It exists in the same mental category as things that are warm, familiar, and safe. Even when we're talking about conspiracy theories and dark character readings and existential questions about the nature of fictional reality, there's a fundamental coziness to the subject matter. Because it's The Simpsons, it's Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie. It's yellow people in a town that doesn't exist, doing ridiculous things that have no real consequences. No matter how dark the theories get, there's always that underlying warmth. That knowledge that, at the end of the day, this is a show about a family that loves each other, however imperfectly. And I think that's why the conspiracy theories about this show are so satisfying to think about as you're drifting off. They're not really threatening. They're not genuinely disturbing. Even the darker ones, like the coma theory or the mod sociopath theory, are ultimately about fictional characters in a fictional world. They let you engage with big, interesting ideas, the nature of reality, the meaning of consciousness, the ethics of secrecy and silence, without any of the stakes that make real-world versions of those ideas stressful. You can think about whether Homer is lying in a hospital bed, unconscious, dreaming of his family, and feel a pang of sadness about it. But it's a safe sadness, a contained sadness. It exists within the boundaries of a cartoon, and it can't escape those boundaries to affect your real life. It's the emotional equivalent of riding a roller coaster. You get the thrill without the danger. And there's something else, too. The Simpsons exists in a permanent present tense. Nobody ages. Nobody changes permanently. The family is always there, always together, always navigating the same town with the same neighbors and the same problems. In a world that's constantly changing, constantly uncertain, constantly demanding that you adapt and adjust and keep up, there's something deeply relaxing about spending time in a place where nothing really changes. Springfield is a fixed point. It's stable. It's eternal. When you think about the conspiracy theories in that light, they actually reinforce the comfort. The coma theory says Homer's family will always be exactly as he remembers them. The Tesseract theory says Springfield exists outside of time. The family genius theory says the Simpsons are more than they appear, secretly capable, secretly brilliant, secretly equipped to handle anything. Even the darkest theories carry an implicit reassurance. The world of the Simpsons is deeper than you think. There's more here than meets the eye, and the more you look, the more you find. That's a comforting thought to fall asleep with, I think. The idea that a show you love has hidden depths you haven't fully explored yet, that there's always more to discover, that even after 35 years, the conversation is just beginning. I also want to acknowledge something about the nature of conspiracy theories themselves, because I think it matters in this context. We use the word conspiracy tonight, and it's the right word for the theme of the video. But these aren't conspiracy theories in the way that the real world usually uses that term. Real-world conspiracy theories are often harmful. They spread misinformation. They erode trust. They can damage people's lives and relationships. The Simpsons conspiracy theories are different. They're creative exercises. They're intellectual play. They bring people together instead of driving them apart. When someone posts the Homer coma theory on Reddit, it doesn't make anyone angry or scared or mistrustful. It makes people go, huh, that's interesting. Let me think about that. It starts conversations. It sparks debate. It makes people rewatch episodes with fresh eyes and share their discoveries with friends. This is conspiracy theorizing at its most wholesome. Nobody is hurt by the theory that Maggie is a genius. Nobody's life is made worse by the idea that Mo knows it's Bart. These theories are a way for people to engage creatively with something they love, and the result is a richer, more interesting experience of the show for everyone involved. I think that's worth celebrating. In a world where the phrase conspiracy theory usually makes people flinch, The Simpsons has given us a space where theorizing is joyful, where looking for hidden patterns is fun instead of paranoid, where the search for hidden truth leads not to division but to community. So if you're lying there right now thinking about Homer in a hospital bed, or about Maggie's quiet little gun-firing gesture, or about the impossible geography of a town that doesn't exist, I hope you're smiling, because these theories, all of them, are gifts. They're the product of decades of love for a show that, against all odds, is still here, still going, still generating new secrets for us to find. And on that thought, truly and finally, let me say goodnight one last time. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for your patience with a video that went on perhaps longer than either of us expected. Thank you for caring about The Simpsons, about its characters, its mysteries, and its stubborn, wonderful refusal to explain itself. The show will be there tomorrow. The theories will be there tomorrow. And if you want, I'll be here tomorrow too, ready to talk about whatever comes next. For now, close your eyes. Let your thoughts settle. Let Springfield fade into the background of your mind, a warm, familiar, impossible little town where nothing changes and everything matters. Sleep well, dream deep, and don't worry about the meaning of life tonight. God will tell you when you're ready. Good night. And actually, I lied. There is one more very small thing. I mentioned the Dead Bart creepypasta earlier, and I want to give it just a little more context because it's one of those internet phenomena that perfectly illustrates the relationship between The Simpsons and its fan community. The Dead Bart creepypasta is a piece of internet fiction that was originally posted anonymously. It describes a supposedly lost episode of The Simpsons in which Bart dies. The story claims that the episode was produced during the early seasons, that it was so disturbing it was never aired, and that Matt Groening becomes visibly distressed whenever anyone asks him about it. The episode supposedly features disturbing imagery, degrading animation quality, and ends with shots of real celebrity graves, some of which belong to people who were still alive at the time the post was written but who have since died. It's fiction, pure fiction, a ghost story written about a television show, but it became enormously popular online, spawning fan art, YouTube readings, analysis videos, and endless debate about whether any element of it could possibly be real. What makes the Dead Bart creepypasta relevant to our conversation tonight is that the show acknowledged it. In season 30, episode 1, Bart's Not Dead, the show directly referenced the creepypasta. The title itself is a wink. The episode's plot involves Bart faking his own near-death experience, and the meta-textual layer is clear. The show is playing with the internet's fascination with Bart dying. By acknowledging the creepypasta, the show did what it always does. It pulled a fan creation into the official canon, played with it, and then walked away without confirming or denying anything. The Dead Bart story is obviously fiction. Everyone knows it's fiction, but the show's willingness to reference it blurs the line between the show and its fan community in a way that's uniquely Simpsons. It's a show that treats its fans as collaborators. That treats fan fiction and fan theories not as threats to be controlled, but as gifts to be acknowledged. That understands intuitively that the boundary between creator and audience is permeable, and that the best art exists in the space where both sides contribute. Every theory we've discussed tonight exists in that space, between the show and us, between what was intended and what was discovered, between the answer and the silence. That space is where The Simpsons lives. Not just on television, not just on streaming platforms, but in the gap between what the show says and what we think it means. And that gap, warm and infinite and full of yellow people doing impossible things in an impossible town, is where we'll leave things tonight. For real this time. Good night.